Major Elijah Holt had been a Texas Knight for 22 years. He'd upheld the code through 3 major conflicts, 14 planetary actions, and countless skirmishes across human space. The quantum spurs integrated into his body had left their characteristic blue trails across hundreds of battlefields. In all that time, he had never executed a surrendered enemy, had never tortured a prisoner, had never targeted non-combatants. That was before the brief. That was before Clarke. That was before he watched 35,624 men and women die over 6 months of captivity. Every name etched into his memory, every face recalled with perfect clarity, every death tallied and recited silently each night before attempting sleep. A knight's enhanced neural pathways ensuring he forgot nothing, not even when he desperately wanted to. "On your feet, human," growled the guard, his obsidian skin absorbing the dim light of the cell block so completely that he seemed more shadow than substance. Only the gleam of yellow eyes and the flash of elongated fangs betrayed his presence in the darkness. Elijah didn't move from his position on the cold floor. His once powerful frame had withered during captivity, but his eyes remained sharp, calculating. The brief had taken his quantum armor, his weapons, even the integrated spurs that had been part of him for decades. They couldn't take his training or his hate. "I said on your feet." The brief slammed a shock baton against the cell's energy barrier, sending painful feedback through the field. Elijah rose slowly, deliberately. 6'4" in his prime, he still towered over most humans, though the brief guard outmassed him by at least 100 pounds of dense muscle and bone. The guard's mouth parted in what passed for a smile, revealing multiple rows of serrated fangs, designed for tearing flesh, evolutionary evidence of their predatory origin. "Commander Graysack wants the knight," the guard told his partner, tongue flicking over those deadly teeth. "Says the scientists are ready for another session." Elijah's face betrayed nothing, though his stomach clenched. He knew what session meant. They'd been trying to understand knight physiology, particularly the quantum neural integration that allowed Texas Knights to use their distinctive technology. Their methods were invasive. The energy barrier dissolved. 2 brief entered, restraints ready, confident in their physical superiority over the weakened human. Standard procedure called for 3 guards, but they'd grown complacent. Elijah had been a model prisoner, quiet, cooperative, seemingly broken. "Arms out," the first guard ordered. Elijah complied, extending his arm slowly. Then exploded into motion. 22 years of night training hadn't evaporated during 6 months of captivity. His right hand struck the first guard's throat in precisely the spot where brief anatomy was vulnerable, crushing the cartilaginous breathing tube. His left hand simultaneously tore the shock baton from the guard's grasp. Before the second guard could react, Elijah had pivoted and driven the baton into the brief's eye socket with enough force to reach the brain. Both guards were dead before they hit the floor. Elijah stood motionless for 3.2 seconds. Listening for alarms, for approaching footsteps. Nothing but the distant screams of prisoners that formed the constant background noise. A camp that housed over 50,000 human prisoners of war. Pilots, Marines, Army grunts, naval crew. Regular soldiers who'd been captured in the Cygnus campaign. The captive population fluctuated as more were brought in to replace those who died under brief care. He was the only knight here. The only knight in brief captivity anywhere as far as he knew. Texas Knights didn't surrender. It was an unspoken rule, but he had broken that rule 6 months ago, surrendering himself to the brief commander Graysack after being promised that the surrounded 5th Battalion would be allowed safe passages if the knight commander gave himself up. "A knight's word is his bond," the code said. "Honor your agreements, even with enemies." The brief had no such code. The 5th Battalion was captured anyway. Over 8,000 men and women. Less than 4,000 remained alive in the camp now. The rest had joined the tally that Elijah recited silently each night. 35,624 names, faces, service numbers. Marines who died in the work gangs, pilots executed for attempted escapes, Navy techs who'd succumbed to the experiments. Elijah stripped the guards of their weapons and comm units. The night code had nothing to say about a situation like this. The brief weren't enemies who could be reasoned with or shown mercy. They were predators who understood only dominance and violence. Their evolutionary history as apex hunters had shaped a culture that viewed other species as either prey or competition to be eliminated. "No more nights," Elijah whispered to himself as he slipped into the corridor. "Not until they pay." The brief never expected a rebellion. Their psychological assessment of humans, especially the Texas Knights, had determined that they prioritized honor and rules of engagement over survival. The brief had calculated that maintaining a steady level of visible atrocity would keep the remaining prisoners compliant through fear, while occasional demonstrations of mercy would provide enough hope to prevent suicidal resistance. They had not accounted for Elijah Holt. He moved through the detention block with methodical precision, killing guards as he encountered them. No alarms had been triggered yet. He disabled the first guard's comm units before they could call for help, and each subsequent pair of guards met the same silent fate. Some cells he opened as he passed, freeing dazed prisoners who stared at him in disbelief. He didn't organize them, didn't give orders, just pointed toward the guards' bodies and the weapons there for the taking. Some understood immediately, arming themselves and continuing the work of liberating others. Some were too broken to comprehend their sudden freedom. Those he left behind, his mission wasn't rescue, it was vengeance. "Major Holt," whispered a Marine captain through the barrier of his cell. "Jesus Christ, you're alive. We thought they'd executed you weeks ago." "Not yet," Elijah replied, his voice flat as he deactivated the barrier. "Armed guards in the north corridor, 6 of them. They'll be making rounds in approximately 4 minutes. Sir, we need to coordinate the prisoners, establish a chain of command." "Do what you want, Captain," Elijah cut him off, already moving toward the next cell block. "I'm going to kill every brief in this facility." "But, sir, the night code—" "Doesn't apply anymore." Elijah continued his methodical advance through the detention blocks, leaving chaos and opportunity in his wake. The prisoners, mostly hardened combat veterans, needed little encouragement once the possibility of rebellion became apparent. Small groups formed organically, squad mates finding each other, officers taking command of whoever would follow. What had begun as one night's rampage quickly evolved into a full-scale uprising, though without central coordination. The first alarm sounded 93 minutes after Elijah killed the initial guards. By then, thousands of prisoners had been freed and over 100 brief guards killed. The predators had become prey, hunted through their own facility by vengeful humans operating in small, improvised units. When the alarm finally blared across the compound, Elijah switched tactics. No mercy, no quarter, no survivors. He muttered to himself, abandoning stealth for speed as he headed toward the camp's command center. He encountered a squad of guards rushing to respond to the alarm. In his prime, with his armor and quantum spurs, he could have defeated them without killing. Without his night equipment, bound by the code, he might have been recaptured or killed. Unburdened by the code, he was something else entirely. The first guard died before he registered the human's presence, a burst of energy fire from a stolen rifle removing most of his skull. The second and third went down in the next 2 seconds, targeted with the precision that had made Texas Knights legendary. The fourth actually managed to raise his weapon before Elijah shot him through the eye. The brief's vampire-like fangs were fearsome in close quarters, designed by evolution to puncture and rend flesh. Their preferred method of execution involved ceremonial feeding, high-ranking officers sinking those fangs into the throats of condemned prisoners. Elijah had been forced to watch countless such feedings during his captivity. Now he made sure to destroy those fangs with follow-up shots to each downed guard. a small but satisfying act of desecration. "Commander Grasact," Elijah spoke into a stolen comm unit as he stepped over the bodies. "If you can hear me, I'm coming for you." By the time Elijah reached the command center, the camp was in chaos. Freed prisoners controlled large sections of the complex, and the brief guards were fighting for their lives against overwhelming numbers of humans driven by months of accumulated hatred. No cohesive plan guided the uprising, just thousands of individual acts of rebellion and revenge that had merged into an unstoppable tide. The command center doors were sealed, but Elijah had acquired explosive charges from a fallen brief demission specialist. He placed them calmly, calculating the minimum force needed to breach the doors without bringing down the structure. The explosion ripped through the reinforced entrance, sending superheated fragments of metal into the brief defenders positioned inside. Elisha moved through the smoke before it cleared, his stolen rifle finding targets through the haze with lethal accuracy. Commander Grasact stood at the far end of the command center, his massive form dwarfing the officers around him. The brief commander was nearly 8 feet tall, his black skin gleaming like polished obsidian under the emergency lighting. His fangs were longer than those of regular brief, genetic markers of his high sight-stopping bloodline. "Knight," he growled, recognizing Elijah despite his emaciated state. "I did not expect this from you. Your kind values honor above victory." "I did," Elijah agreed, advancing steadily as he eliminated the last defenders with precise shots. "Then I watched you feed on my men after I surrendered to save them." "Those were the actions of a superior predator dealing with inferior prey," Grasact said, drawing his ceremonial blade, a curved weapon nearly 4 feet long. "You will be recaptured, Knight, and when you are, I will personally drain you dry while your heart still beats." Elijah didn't bother responding. The rifle in his hand spoke for him, sending a burst of energy fire toward the brief commander. Grasact was faster than his size suggested. He dodged sideways, the energy bolts scorching the wall behind him, and charged. Elijah fired again, catching the commander in the shoulder but failing to stop his rush. The impact of 300 kilograms of muscle and bone sent Elijah flying across the command center. His rifle skittered away, and he felt ribs crack from the collision. In his weakened state, he had no hope of matching the brief's raw strength. "You see?" Grasact sneered, advancing with his blade raised. "Without your precious armor, you are nothing but meat. Prey, like all the rest." Elijah rolled aside as the blade came down, embedding itself in the metal flooring. He lashed out with a kick to the brief's knee, striking the joint from the side where it was most vulnerable. Something snapped audibly, and Grasact roared in pain. The commander's next swing caught Elijah across the chest, opening a deep gash but missing vital organs. Blood leaked from the wound as Elijah scrambled away, searching for a weapon. His hand closed around a fallen brief's shock baton. Not ideal against a blade, but better than nothing. "I studied your kind extensively," Grasact said, limping forward. "Texas Knights, with your codes and your quantum technology, so concerned with honor that you handicap yourselves." He ran his tongue across his fangs, eyes fixed on the blood seeping from Elijah's wound. "That is why you will lose this war. That is why you will feed us." "Maybe," Elijah acknowledged, circling warily, "but you won't be there to see it." He feinted left, then dove right as Grasact committed to a powerful swing. The blade whistled overhead as Elijah rolled beneath the brief's guard and drove the shock baton upward with all his remaining strength, finding the soft tissue beneath the commander's jaw and discharging its full power directly into the brain. Grasact convulsed, blade falling from nerveless fingers, then collapsed like a mountain crumbling. Elijah stood over the twitching body, shock baton still pressed against the dying brief's throat. "The code says I should give you a clean death," he said quietly, "but I'm not a knight right now." He left the baton activated until Grasact stopped moving entirely, smoke rising from burnt flesh. Then methodically, He smashed every fang in the commander's mouth with the butt of the weapon. With the command center secured, Elijah accessed the facility's databases. He wasn't interested in coordinating the escape effort. That was happening organically throughout the camp as veteran officers regained control of their units and established evacuation plans. His sole focus was finding where they had taken his armor. The answer came quickly. A research facility 2 kilometers east of the camp. That's where they'd transported his quantum armor after capture, where they'd been attempting to reverse engineer night technology. The same facility also served as an advanced interrogation center and experimental laboratory, where thousands of human prisoners had vanished over the past months. Names flashed through Elijah's enhanced memory. Lieutenant Jessica Donaldson, Naval Intelligence, died day 47. Chief Warrant Officer Michael A. Sage, Marine Corps, died day 112. Captain Sanjay Mehta, Aerospace Force, died day 88. Thousands more who had been transferred to the research facility, never to return. All recorded in his perfect memory, part of the tally he recited each night. They would be avenged. Elijah downloaded a schematic of the research facility, noting its defenses and layout. Then he appropriated supplies from the command center's medical station, treating his own wounds with the efficiency of someone who had long experience with field medicine. As he worked, a group of freed prisoners entered the command center, a mixture of Marines and Army infantry led by a battle-scarred colonel. "Major Holt," the colonel called, approaching cautiously. "Colonel Regan, 103rd Infantry. We've secured the north quadrant and disabled the perimeter defenses. Evacuation is underway." Elijah nodded without looking up from his self-administered medical treatment. "Good. Sir, we need night expertise to coordinate—" "I'm not functioning as a night colonel," Elijah interrupted. "Do what you need to do. I have my own mission." Regan studied him for a moment, noting the flat affect, the methodical movements, the complete absence of the compassion and honor that Texas Knights were famous for. "They really broke you, didn't they?" he said softly. Elijah's hands paused briefly in their work. "No," he finally responded. "They just showed me what I really am when the code is stripped away." He secured the last bandage and stood. "Get your people out. I'm heading east to the research facility." "That's suicide, Major. That place is a fortress with at least 200 brief troops. I'm aware of the odds." Elijah gathered weapons and supplies, checking each methodically. "At least take a squad with you." "No." Elijah's voice was final. "Your job is evacuation, mine is retribution." Regan recognized the futility of further argument. "Well, if you're determined to go alone, at least take better weapons." He signaled, and one of his Marines brought forward an enhanced rifle they'd captured from a brief officer. "This has 3 times the power capacity of the standard models." Elijah accepted the weapon with a nod of thanks. "One more thing," Regan added. "When this is over, I don't know what Night Command will say about your actions today, but every prisoner in this camp owes you their life." "I didn't do it for them," Elijah said honestly. "I did it for the 35,624 who didn't make it." He slung the rifle and turned toward the exit. "And for what the brief took from me when they made me watch." The research facility rose from the forest like an alien cathedral, its black spires cutting into the moonlit sky. Elijah moved through the underbrush toward the perimeter fence, alone and focused solely on his objective. The facility's commanders knew about the camp uprising, but believed they had time to prepare. They didn't expect an immediate assault by a single man, especially not one who should have been too weak from captivity to pose a threat. They especially didn't expect Elijah Holt. The perimeter defenses were formidable. Motion sensors, automated turrets, and energy barriers designed to keep prisoners in and rescuers out. Under normal circumstances, breaching them would require a full tactical team with specialized equipment. Elijah had spent 6 months observing brief protocols and technologies. He knew their blind spots, their procedural weaknesses. More importantly, he no longer cared if he survived the mission. He approached a maintenance access point, timing his movements between automated sensor sweeps. A brief technician emerged on routine inspection, and Elijah struck with silent efficiency, taking the alien's identification and access cards before dragging the body into the underbrush. The access point admitted him to a service tunnel that ran beneath the main facility. Inside, he encountered two more technicians, both dispatched before they could raise an alarm. The tunnel led to a utility junction that connected to the main building. Elijah consulted the schematic he had memorized, orienting himself within the complex. The armor storage facility would be in the high-security wing, 3 levels up from his current position. Between him and his target waited approximately 200 brief personnel, most armed and now on high alert due to news from the prison camp. He proceeded anyway, moving with the quiet confidence of a knight who had accepted his own expendability. The first real resistance came at a security checkpoint between sections. 4 guards, all armed with heavy weapons, barred the way. Elijah didn't bother with stealth or tactics. He simply walked into view and opened fire with the enhanced rifle, cutting down 3 guards before they could properly react. The 4th managed to trigger an alarm before joining his comrades in death. Klaxons blared throughout the facility. Elijah ignored them, continuing his methodical advance. When squads of brief security forces arrived to intercept him, he engaged them with a combination of precision fire and calculated movement that maximized the structural cover available to him, while exposing his enemies to lethal crossfire. His night training had included comprehensive tactical simulations against overwhelming odds. These scenarios were meant to teach restraint and non-lethal resolution. Elijah now applied the same tactical principles, with one crucial difference. He aimed exclusively for kill shots. Level by level, corridor by corridor, he fought his way upward through the facility. The brief threw increasingly desperate forces against him, unable to comprehend how a single human could inflict such devastating losses. What they couldn't understand was that Elijah Holt was no longer fighting to win. He was fighting to punish. Each brief that fell was a small payment against the debt of 35,624 human lives. By the time he reached the high-security wing, he had exhausted his captured rifle's power cells and was using weapons taken from fallen brief. His body was functioning on pure adrenaline and conditioning, pushing through injuries that would have incapacitated a normal human. The armor storage facility doors were sealed with quantum locks, technology stolen from captured night equipment. Elijah studied the control panel, recognizing the design. He typed a complex sequence into the panel. Night command codes changed regularly, but certain master overrides remained constant, known only to knights of major rank and above. The doors resisted briefly, then slid open. Inside, his armor stood on a maintenance frame. Partial disassembly had exposed the quantum core and neural interface components, where brief scientists had been attempting to understand the technology that made knights so formidable. Most importantly, his quantum spurs rested in a shielded container, their blue energy signature muted but still visible. For the first time since his capture, Elijah felt something close to completion. He approached his armor reverently. The neural interface was damaged but functional. The quantum core had been tampered with but not destroyed. The outer plating showed signs of forced entry, where the brief had cut their way in to study the internal components. It would work. Not at full capacity, but enough. Elijah began the integration process, connecting his body's implants to the armor's systems. Pain lanced through him as damaged neural pathways reactivated, but he embraced it, used it to focus. The quantum spurs were next, their familiar energy signature flaring to life as they recognized their knight. The neural connection was rough, incomplete due to the damage, but the blue fire that traced his steps would still disrupt enemy coordination and enhance his combat capabilities. As the last components locked into place, Elijah Holt stood transformed. No longer the emaciated prisoner, but not quite the knight major he had been. Something in between. Damaged, but dangerous. He retrieved his sidearm from the equipment locker. a standard night-issue quantum pistol, and felt another piece of himself slot back into place. The facility's internal sensors would have detected the quantum energy signature of his activated armor. The brief would know exactly where he was and what had happened. They would be converging on his position with everything they had left. Good. Elijah accessed the facility's computer network through his armor's systems. He located the prisoner holding areas 2 levels below 45, where captured humans were subjected to experiments designed to understand human physiology and test biological weapons. The records showed 217 humans still alive in those chambers. His original mission had been revenge, not rescue. With his armor restored and his strength returning through the neural enhancement systems, Elijah found a fragment of his former self resurfacing. Not the night code that had been discarded beyond recovery, but the basic humanity that had led him to surrender himself in a failed attempt to save others. He set the armor's systems to bypass the facility's security and release the locks on all prisoner cells, then programmed the emergency evacuation protocols to activate, providing the captives with a potential escape route. That done, he turned his attention to the approaching brief's security forces. His armor's sensors detected 3 full squads converging on his position from different directions. Against a knight at full capacity, that would be challenging but survivable. Against his damaged armor and weakened body, the odds were significantly worse. Elisha felt his quantum spurs flare with renewed energy. The blue fire of his steps grew more intense as the armor's systems synchronized with his neural patterns, compensating for damage by routing around broken connections and establishing new pathways. "Come on, then," he whispered to the approaching forces. "Let's finish this." The battle that followed would later be classified in official night records. Witnesses would be sworn to secrecy. The Texas Night Command, upholders of honor and restraint across human space, could not acknowledge what one of their most decorated officers had done when pushed beyond the limits of his code. But the freed prisoners would tell the story anyway, of how a single knight, presumed dead after surrender, had single-handedly initiated the largest POW escape of the war, how he had killed the camp commander and then proceeded alone to the heavily fortified research facility, how he had cut a path of destruction through the brief ranks, recovering his armor and freeing the experimental subjects before destroying the facility with its own reactor core. They would speak in hushed tones of a knight who had set aside the code to become vengeance incarnate, who had recited 35,624 names to himself as he worked, a litany of the fallen driving him forward when his body should have failed. 3 days later, a battered transport ship broke atmosphere, carrying the survivors of Camp Grazat toward the human fleet waiting in the outer system. Aboard, over 48,000 former prisoners received medical treatment, food, and the first real rest they'd had in months. In the ship's small medical bay, Elijah Holt lay unconscious, his damaged armor removed, a dozen life support systems monitoring his failing body. The quantum spurs integrated into his body hummed softly, their energy signatures stabilizing as the medical systems fought to save him. Colonel Reagan stood beside the bed, speaking quietly to the ship's captain. "Will he make it?" the captain asked, eyeing the knight's broken form. "The doctors aren't sure," Reagan replied. "It took hits that would have killed 10 normal men. The only thing keeping him alive is the quantum integration in his nervous system. At least that's my theory. It could also just be hate." "Night Command has sent a specialized medical team to meet us at the rendezvous point," the captain noted. "They're very interested in debriefing the Major when he stabilizes." "I bet they are," Reagan said grimly. "They'll want to know how one of their knights, the embodiment of their precious code, turned into the most efficient killing machine this war has seen." The captain looked uncomfortable. "The reports I've received, they're difficult to believe. Over 600 confirmed brief kills by a single operator. I saw the aftermath at the research facility," Reagan confirmed. "It wasn't combat, it was execution. He didn't just kill them, he systematically eliminated every brief in that complex. Night Command won't like that." "No," Reagan agreed. Their code exists for a reason. When a knight with their training and technology operates without restraint, the results are—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Apocalyptic." They both looked down at the unconscious form of Major Elijah Holt. His lips moved slightly, reciting names in his delirium, names of the fallen, names that had driven him beyond the code, beyond humanity, into something else entirely. "What happens to him now?" the captain asked. "That depends," Reagan said, "on whether Knight Holt ever comes back from wherever he's gone. The man in that armor wasn't a knight anymore. He was something new. Something I hope to God we never need again." Elijah's quantum spurs pulsed softly with blue energy, growing stronger as his body fought to heal. Soon they would flare with their full intensity again. Soon he would wake and face the consequences of his actions, the lives he had saved and the code he had abandoned. Whether he could ever fully reclaim his mantle as a Texas knight remained to be seen. For now, the recitation of 35,624 names continued in his dreams, a litany of the dead that had transformed honor into vengeance, restraint into reckoning, a knight into an avenger. Colonel Reagan entered the ship's medical bay for his daily check on the wounded. 5 days had passed since their escape from Talak. Most of the injured were stabilizing, their vitals improving under proper care after months of brief captivity. But one patient remained a constant concern. Reagan approached Holt's bed hesitantly, steeling himself for the sight of the comatose knight hooked to life support systems. Instead, he froze mid-step. Major Elijah Holt was sitting upright, a data tablet balanced on his lap. His fingers moved across the screen with frantic precision, his eyes locked on the display with an intensity that seemed almost feverish. Dangling tubes and monitoring wires had been carelessly pushed aside, some disconnected entirely. "Major?" Reagan approached cautiously. "You shouldn't be—" "Need to document them all," Holt interrupted without looking up. His voice was a rasp, damaged from days of intubation. "Every name, every cause, every debt that needs to be paid." Reagan peered at the tablet screen and felt his blood run cold. Holt had created a meticulous database. Names, ranks, service numbers, dates of death, and most disturbing, detailed descriptions of how each prisoner had died. Lieutenant Winston Wells, 5th Naval Strike Group. Day 98, selected for ceremonial feeding. Commander Vizrak, exsanguination while conscious. PFC Miguel Sanchez, 103rd Infantry. Day 41, stress testing in thermal chamber. Death by hypothermia during tissue sampling. Captain Darius Okoye, Aerospace Defense. Day 127, neural extraction experiment. Survived 16 hours post-procedure. Sergeant Amara Blackwood, 71st Recon Division. Day 203, breeding compatibility trials. Died during forced implantation of brief embryo. Flight Lieutenant Grant Blackwood, 71st Recon Divisio. Day 203, blood replacement experiment. Heart failure after 87% circulatory system replacement with brief fluids. Medical Officer Elena Katri, UNNC Hospital Ship Mercy. Day 76, vivisection to study comparative anatomy. Kept conscious throughout entire 14-hour procedure. The list went on. Thousands of entries already completed, each with clinical precision, but unmistakable fury embedded in every word. "How long have you been awake?" Reagan asked. 17 hours, 22 minutes, Holt answered, still not looking up. "Need to document the worst ones first. The ceremonial feedings, the live dissections, the ones they kept conscious through the procedures." Reagan noticed Holt's quantum spurs were pulsing with an irregular glow, not the characteristic blue of night technology, but a deep, blood red that seemed to throb with each beat of his heart. The medical monitors that remained connected showed vitals that should have been impossible for someone in his condition, a body pushing far beyond human limits. "Major, the doctors need to examine you. Your injuries, your spurs." "They're red. We'll wait," Holt cut him off. 35,624 names. I've documented 7,342 so far. His fingers continued their relentless typing. "Each one needs to be remembered. Each one needs to be avenged." He didn't acknowledge the comment about his spurs, as if their unnatural crimson glow was of no concern. Reagan studied the knight's face. The hollow-eyed prisoner from the camp was gone. So was the vengeance-driven specter who had cut through the brief like a quantum blade. This was something else. Methodical, focused, cold, in a way that made Reagan's combat instincts scream danger. "Holt," Reagan tried again. "Night Command will be here in 2 hours. They've sent a specialized medical team and debriefing officers." For the first time, Holt paused his documentation. "Have they?" His voice remained flat, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Good. I have something to show them." With sudden fluidity that belied his injuries, Holt reached beneath his medical gown and produced a small metal case. His quantum spurs flared crimson as he opened it, revealing 12 gleaming bullets arranged in precise rows. They appeared to be standard ammunition for a night-issue sidearm, except for one crucial difference. They shone with the unmistakable luster of pure silver. "What are those?" Reagan asked, though some part of him already knew. "The old ways," Holt replied, lifting one of the silver projectiles and examining it in the harsh medical bay lighting. "The reef are creatures of nightmare, monsters of the night. They drink blood, shun light, hunt in packs. They're vampires, Colonel, just like in the old stories." He placed the bullet back in the case with surgical precision. "I made these myself. Stole a cutting torch from my armor's repair kit, commandeered some hospital equipment when the night shift wasn't looking, melted down a silver medical instrument I found in storage, emptied the powder from my sidearm's existing rounds." Reagan felt a chill run down his spine. "Silver bullets like in the old legends?" "The oldest legends exist for a reason, Colonel." Holt's quantum spurs pulsed blood red in time with his words. "Creatures of the night. Silver through the heart. It's not science. It's not technology. It's primal. It's instinct." "This is insanity, Holt," Regan said, but without conviction. After what he'd witnessed at the research facility, he couldn't discount anything, no matter how outlandish. "Night Command won't approve experimental ammunition based on Earth folklore." "Night Command can approve or disapprove as they please," Holt replied, returning to his documentation. "But I'm going hunting either way." The Night Command delegation arrived precisely on schedule. 3 senior officers in immaculate uniforms, accompanied by a medical team pushing specialized equipment. Their quantum spurs left pristine blue trails across the medical bay floor as they approached Holt's bed. By then, Holt had allowed the doctors to reconnect some of his monitoring equipment, though he'd refused to relinquish his data tablet. He sat upright, his posture perfect despite injuries that should have left him bedridden for weeks. Colonel Reagan stood to the side, watching the encounter with growing unease. "Major Holt," the lead night officer began, "I am Commander Sutton from Night Command Strategic Operations. These are Medical Director Walsh and Special Investigator Reeves. We're here to debrief you on the events at Tulloch and evaluate your status." Holt's face remained impassive. "Of course, Commander." "Before we begin," Sutton continued, "I want to acknowledge that while your actions resulted in the largest POW recovery of the war, they represented significant deviations from the Night Code. This debriefing will address those deviations." "I'm aware of my deviations, Commander," Holt replied, his voice unnervingly calm. "I've documented them alongside my other observations. He gestured to his data tablet. "Would you like to review the case files of 35,624 humans who died while Night Command observed the code?" Sutton's expression tightened. "Major, your tone is inappropriate. You surrendered yourself to enemy forces, already a violation of Night protocols." "What followed was necessary," Holt interrupted, "and will be again." It was then that Commander Sutton noticed the crimson glow emanating from beneath Holt's medical gown. "Major, your quantum spurs." Before Sutton could finish, Holt reached beneath his blanket and produced the metal case. He opened it smoothly, revealing the silver bullets nestled in their compartments. "What is this?" Special Investigator Reeves demanded, leaning forward to examine the ammunition. "The future of our war against the brief," Holt stated, removing one bullet and holding it up. The overhead lights caught the polished silver, sending reflections dancing across the medical bay. Pure silver, hand-forged, for Night sidearms. "Unauthorized ammunition modifications are against regulations," Sutton began, but Medical Director Walsh raised a hand to stop him. "Silver?" Walsh asked, professional curiosity overriding protocol. "Silver?" "Because the brief are vampires," Holt said, tossing the bullet in the air and catching it with unnatural precision. His quantum spurs flared crimson, bathing the room in bloody light. Not metaphorically, literally. Creatures of the night that feed on blood. And like all monsters from the old stories, they have weaknesses. The night officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Major Holt," Sutton said carefully, "you've experienced severe trauma. Psychological evaluation is standard procedure after extended captivity. These theories suggest you need comprehensive assessment before returning to active duty, if you return at all." Holt's quantum spurs flared suddenly, the red glow intensifying until it cast everyone's shadow against the walls. "I spent 6 months watching them feed, watching them drain humans dry while their victims remained conscious, watching them perform rituals with the blood. They don't just kill, Commander. They feast, they worship. They're monsters wearing the skin of soldiers." He leaned forward, the movement predatory. "But I understand your skepticism. That's why I've arranged a demonstration." "A demonstration?" Walsh echoed. "Colonel Reagan has been kind enough to allow me access to a secured laboratory on this vessel," Holt explained. "I've prepared Bree's remains for testing. You'll see the reaction for yourselves." Reagan shifted uncomfortably as all eyes turned to him. He hadn't explicitly authorized Holt's experimentation, but he hadn't stopped it either. After witnessing the night's efficiency at the research facility, contradicting him seemed unwise. "This is highly irregular," Sutton protested. "So is losing a war against creatures that shouldn't exist," Holt countered, closing the case with a decisive click. "We have to kill every last one of those vampires, and I've got an old theory to test out." He tossed another silver bullet in his hand, the motion casual but the intent behind it anything but. "The question, Commander, is whether Night Command will join me in this hunt, or if I'll need to proceed alone." The challenge hung in the air between them. For a moment, Reagan thought Sutton might order Holt's immediate detention. Instead, the commander's quantum spurs pulsed once, a brief acknowledgement between nights. "Show us your evidence, Major," Sutton said. "Then we'll discuss your hunt." Holt's lips curved in what might have been a smile on another man. On him, it looked like a predator baring its teeth. "With pleasure, Commander." He rose from the bed with fluid grace that belied his injuries, the silver bullet still dancing between his fingers. It's time the Knights learned how to kill monsters. As they left the medical bay, Reagan caught a glimpse of Holt's data tablet, still displaying his meticulous documentation of the dead. The screen had changed to a new section titled simply, "The Hunter's Handbook." Beneath it was a single line of text. "For the 35,624, No mercy, no quarter, no survivors. Reagan shivered, not from cold but from certainty. Night Command had come to reclaim one of their own, to bring a rogue element back under the code. Instead, they were about to create something new. Holt, the vampire slayer, was about to be born. Colonel Reagan stared at the empty medical bay bed, the disconnected monitors dangling uselessly above rumpled sheets. Alarms still blared throughout the ship, security teams racing through corridors that Holt had already navigated and abandoned. They were too late. They had been too late, the moment they'd let their guard down. "How long?" Commander Sutton demanded, his quantum spurs leaving precise blue trails as he paced the room, a stark contrast to the chaotic crimson streaks that had marked Holt's departure 6 hours earlier. "Unknown," Reagan admitted. "The night medical staff last confirmed visual at 200 hours. Security discovered him missing at 6:30. And the shuttle bay breach? Confirmed. One tactical scout vessel missing, transponder disabled." Sutton's face hardened. He disabled a night vessel's tracking systems? "That's not possible without command codes," Reagan finished. "Yes, sir. Yet he did it anyway." Medical Director Musk approached with Holt's abandoned data tablet. "You need to see this, Commander." The screen displayed what appeared to be a title page, elegantly formatted with military precision. "They who feast on blood, the complete registry of the fallen Camp Tolek. Cygnus 4 35,624. Souls below." The title was a message, its simplicity somehow more chilling than any lengthy manifesto. "I will finish what the Knights cannot." Elijah Holt. "Night no more." "Open the file," Sutton ordered. Musk's finger hesitated above the screen. "Sir, I've already reviewed the first few entries. It's disturbing." "Open it." The document expanded to reveal thousands of meticulously organized entries. Names, ranks, service numbers, causes of death recorded with clinical precision yet unmistakable fury embedded in every word. The most horrific deaths were highlighted in red: ceremonial feedings, live dissections, breeding experiments, blood replacements. Beside many entries were the names of specific brief officers or scientists responsible. "My God," Sutton whispered, his professional composure cracking as he scrolled through the endless catalog of atrocities. "He documented all of them?" "Every single one," Reagan confirmed. 35,624 deaths, memorized during 6 months of captivity. The man sat there in that cell watching our people die and committed each name to memory. "That's not possible," Musk interjected, "even with eidetic memory." "Maybe he's obsessed," Reagan offered. "Maybe he's insane. Or maybe witnessing that level of horror changes a man in ways we can't understand." He gestured to the tablet. "Read entry number 27,493. Sutton scrolled down, finding the entry. Lieutenant Marissa Matterhorn, 309th Medical Corps. Day 159. Selected for demonstration of circulatory replacement therapy. Subject remained conscious during sequential removal and replacement of 82% of blood volume with brief hemolymph. Death occurred after 7 hours, 42 minutes. Procedure presided over by High Priest Kavar. Subject's final words: "Tell my daughter I love her." He recorded their last words, Sutton said quietly. "When he could," Reagan confirmed. "He told me he was often forced to watch the procedures up close, said the brief wanted him to see what would eventually happen to him." Special Investigator Eckert, who had been examining the room's security systems, approached with another tablet. "We have the lab footage from yesterday's demonstration." The screen displayed Holt standing before the Night Command delegation. On a sterile examination table lay brief tissue samples. Skin, blood, internal organs, salvaged from the battlefield. With methodical precision, Holt had demonstrated his theories. silver causing catastrophic cellular breakdown on contact, certain plant compounds triggering allergic reaction. The most concerning part comes next, Eckert said, forwarding the recording. Holt's voice emanated from the tablet, unnervingly calm. Knight Command has always focused on the brief as an enemy combatant species to be defeated through conventional warfare. This is fundamental miscalculation. They are not soldiers. They are not even aliens in the traditional sense. They are vampires, creatures of nightmare that feed on sentient beings, that derive pleasure from suffering, that conduct blood rituals older than their recorded history. The camera showed Commander Sutton's skeptical expression. Major, these claims require substantiation beyond. I've substantiated them with 6 months of direct observation, Holt interrupted, his red quantum spurs flaring. I've watched their high priests consume the life essence of prisoners during eclipse ceremonies. I've documented their hibernation cycles corresponding to lunar phases. I've observed their ritual scarification that matches pre-space flight vampire iconography from a dozen Earth cultures. He held up a silver bullet, turning it so it caught the light. This isn't fringe theory, Commander. This is existential threat assessment. The brief aren't fighting for territory or resources or political dominance. They're fighting for food, for worship, for the spread of their blood religion across human space. In the recording, Holt leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the crimson glow of his spurs. Knight Command can continue fighting this like a conventional war if you wish, but I've seen the truth, and I'm going to exterminate them like the monsters they are. Reagan muted the recording. After that, we agreed to continue discussions this morning. Obviously, Major Holt had other plans. He's gone rogue with experimental weapons, stolen Knight technology, and a personal vendetta, Sutton summarized grimly. This is unprecedented. With respect, Commander, Reagan said, everything about Elijah Holt is unprecedented now. You saw his spurs. No Knight in recorded history has ever manifested red quantum energies. And his combat effectiveness at the research facility, Musk added quietly. 600 confirmed kills as a single operator, without his armor, while critically injured. Our medical scans showed he had multiple broken ribs, internal bleeding, and severe malnutrition during that rampage. Sutton's expression darkened further. How is that physically possible? It isn't, Musk said simply. Not by any medical standard, I understand. He should have collapsed after the first dozen kills. Instead, he systematically eliminated every brief in that facility while operating at what should have been lethal injury levels. The code exists for a reason, Sutton said, his voice tight with controlled concern. A Knight with Holt's training, experience, and technology, operating without restraint, without oversight, is exactly what the brief deserve, Reagan finished, unable to contain himself. A tense silence fell across the medical bay. You sympathize with him, Sutton observed. I watched the recordings from Talek, Reagan said. I saw the aftermath of what they did to our people. If Holt's silver bullets and old legends can end this war faster than conventional tactics, I won't lose sleep over Knight protocols being violated. This isn't about protocols, Sutton countered. This is about unleashing something we don't understand. You didn't just see his spurs, Colonel. You felt them. That wasn't standard quantum technology anymore. Reagan had no reply. The memory of standing in Holt's crimson glow had left him with nightmares. The sensation of ancient, predatory instincts awakening, of something primal recognizing a superior hunter. In that moment, he had understood on a visceral level why the brief had been so careful to keep Holt restrained during his captivity. Even broken and without his armor, something about the man had changed fundamentally. What are your orders, Commander? Eckert asked, breaking the silence. Sutton straightened. Decision made. Track the stolen vessel. Dispatch a Knight recovery team. Major Holt is to be apprehended and returned to Knight Command for comprehensive evaluation. And if he resists? Musk asked. Sutton's quantum spurs flared blue, controlled, precise, everything Holt's wild crimson energy was not. Then God help whoever stands between Elijah Holt and his prey, because we certainly can't. As Sutton and Eckert left to coordinate the recovery mission, Musk lingered in the medical bay with Reagan. "You're not telling them everything," she said quietly after ensuring they were alone. Regan's face remained impassive. "I don't know what you mean, Doctor. I've reviewed the medical data from the rescue ship multiple times." She held up her tablet, displaying Holt's biometric readings. "These patterns aren't just anomalous. They're impossible." His cellular regeneration rate increased by 300% after he recovered his armor. The quantum integration with his nervous system shows completely novel energy signatures. "Your point?" "My point, Colonel, is that whatever came back from Talek isn't just Major Holt anymore." Musk lowered her voice further. "The blood work we did while he was unconscious, there were traces of brief hemolymph in his system, integrated with his own blood chemistry." Reagan's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting he's been infected? Turned?" "I'm suggesting something more complex. The brief were experimenting on him, just as they did with other prisoners, testing the limits of human brief compatibility. And I think they succeeded in ways they didn't anticipate. Holt was already unique. Knights undergo extensive genetic and neural modification during their training. What if the brief experiments triggered something unexpected? A mutation or adaptation that incorporated elements of their biology into his quantum systems. Reagan considered this. His spurs turned red after he killed Grzak, after he'd been exposed to massive amounts of brief blood during his escape. Exactly. Musk glanced at the door to ensure they were still alone. "Colonel, I've been researching brief mythology since Holt's demonstration yesterday. Their own legends speak of a crimson hunter who would rise from among their prey species and bring destruction to their kind. You can't be serious." "I'm a scientist. I deal in observable phenomena." She handed him a data chip. "These are my complete findings on Holt's condition, along with translations of brief mythological texts recovered from their abandoned outposts. Knight Command won't want this information spread, too destabilizing to our understanding of quantum technology." Reagan pocketed the chip. "Why give this to me?" "Because you've seen him up close. You know what he's capable of." Musk's expression hardened. "And because if there's even a chance that Holt has become what these texts describe, a predator specifically evolved to hunt the brief, then maybe the most humane course of action is to let him complete his mission." "Knight Command won't see it that way." "No," she agreed. "They'll want to study him, understand him, control him, turn him back into a weapon that follows their code." Reagan's comm unit chimed, signaling he was needed on the bridge. As he turned to leave, Musk caught his arm. "One more thing, Colonel. When Holt recited those names in his sleep, his quantum readings spiked with each name, almost as if he was drawing energy from the recitation itself." The implication hung in the air between them, that Holt's litany of the dead wasn't just remembrance, but fuel for whatever he was becoming. The stars blurred outside the tactical scout vessel's viewports as Holt pushed the engines beyond their rated specifications. His damaged armor had been repaired as best he could manage with the ship's limited facilities. The crimson glow of his quantum spurs reflected off the cockpit controls, bathing everything in blood-red light. On the navigation display, a route pulsed steadily, not toward human space or Knight Command outposts, but directly into the heart of brief territory, specifically toward Volkmar Prime, the ancestral homeworld of the species that had shown him the true nature of evil. "Night Vessel ZT-109, this is Human Defense Force Outpost Delta 7. You are approaching restricted space without proper clearance. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." Holt ignored the communication. The outpost's weapons couldn't lock onto his vessel at this distance, and he'd be beyond their range in minutes. Knight Command would have already issued alerts about his unauthorized departure, but bureaucracy would slow their response. He had time enough for what needed to be done. The ship's computer chimed, indicating an incoming transmission on a military emergency channel. Holt considered ignoring it, then reluctantly accepted. The screen displayed Colonel Reagan's weathered face. "Major," Reagan greeted him, no surprise evident in his expression. "Colonel," Holt acknowledged. "Night Command send you to talk me back?" "No. This is a personal call. They don't know I'm contacting you." Holt raised an eyebrow. Risky behavior for a decorated officer. Some risks are worth taking. Reagan's eyes studied him through the screen. "Where you headed?" "You know where." Reagan nodded slowly. "Volkmar Prime, the heart of darkness itself, their breeding world, their temple planet, the source." Holt's spurs pulsed crimson with each word. "I'm going to burn it to the ground, with one ship, one night." "Even you can't." "I'm not a knight anymore," Holt interrupted. "Knights have codes, limits. I shed those at Clarke." Reagan was silent for a moment. "You left quite an impression on Night Command." "Sutton's dispatching a recovery team. They won't find me." "No, they probably won't." Reagan's expression shifted slightly. "But others might." Word spreading, Holt. About what happened at Clarke, about what you did, about what the brief really are. Holt's eyes narrowed. "Meaning?" "Meaning there are stories circulating throughout the fleet about a knight who killed 600 brief with his bare hands while half dead from torture, about silver bullets and vampire weaknesses, about a man who memorized the names of 35,000 dead." "Night Command will suppress it?" Reagan smiled grimly. "You can't suppress a crusade once it starts. Check your long-range sensors." Bearing 227 Mark 43. Holt frowned, activating the sensor array. 6 small vessels appeared, following his trajectory at maximum speed. "Who are they?" "Combat veterans from across the brief front. Pilots, Marines, Special Forces operatives who've seen firsthand what these creatures really are." Reagan leaned closer to the camera. "You're not alone in this fight, Holt. You've started something when you freed those camps, something Night Command can't control." Holt's expression remained impassive, but his quantum spurs flared briefly. "I work alone. Maybe. But there are thousands who want to join your hunt. These 6 are just the vanguard." Sensor data streamed across Holt's display, confirming Reagan's words. The pursuing vessels were military-grade ships with serial numbers that had been wiped from official records. Black Ops craft repurposed for a mission that didn't officially exist, some with experimental weapons arrays that would never pass Defense Force inspection. "They'll get themselves killed," Holt said. "Probably," Reagan agreed. "But they've made their choice, just like you made yours." Holt stared at the sensor readings, something unfamiliar stirring beneath his focused rage. For 6 months, he had recited 35,624 names each night, a private litany of the fallen. The thought that others might be carrying their own lists, nursing similar wounds, seeking the same vengeance. "There's more," Reagan said, interrupting his thoughts. "Musk found something in brief mythology, legends about a crimson hunter who would rise from among their victims." Holt's fingers paused over the controls. "Superstition? Maybe. Or maybe there's a reason your spurs turned red after you killed Grizakt. A reason you were able to kill 600 brief while critically injured and without armor." Reagan's expression was carefully neutral. "The brief experimented on you for 6 months, Holt. Changed you in ways we don't fully understand." "I know what I am," Holt replied, his voice cold. "Do you?" "Because Musk thinks you might be the very thing the brief have feared for centuries, a predator specifically evolved to hunt them." The crimson light from Holt's spurs intensified, casting harsh shadows across his face. "Is that why you're contacting me? Scientific curiosity?" "I'm contacting you because Night Command will try to bring you in, study you, control you, and because I've seen what the brief do to our people." Reagan's voice hardened. "If you really are what these legends describe, then maybe the most humane thing is to let you finish your hunt. And if I'm just a broken knight with a vendetta, Then at least you'll cause enough chaos in brief space to give our conventional forces an opening. Regan glanced off screen, then back at the camera. Either way, there are people following you now who believe in your mission, people who've seen the truth about the brief and want to fight them on their own terms. Why are you telling me this? Regan's expression softened slightly. Because even a crusade needs direction. Leadership. Someone who knows what they're truly facing. I'm not a leader. I'm a hunter. You can be both. Regan glanced off screen again. I need to go. Night Command is monitoring communications. Just consider what I've said, and this. He transmitted a file, Musk's research on brief mythology and the Crimson Hunter legend, along with her analysis of Holt's biological changes. She thinks the brief accidentally created their own destruction when they experimented on you, Regan explained. That somehow your night modifications combined with their blood rituals turned you into something new, something designed to hunt them. The transmission ended, leaving Holt alone with the crimson glow of his spurs and the rhythmic pulse of the engine. He opened Musk's file, scanning the translated brief texts. And from among the cattle shall rise the Crimson Hunter, bearing the mark of our own life essence turned against us. Its step shall leave fire in its wake, and our ancient weaknesses shall be known to it. Neither darkness nor distance shall conceal us from its wrath. Holt closed the file. Mythology, superstition, yet he could not deny the changes in himself. The red glow of his spurs where once there was blue, the preternatural strength that had allowed him to fight through injuries that should have been fatal, the constant thirst for brief blood that had awakened in him since killing Grazak. After several minutes of consideration, he adjusted his course slightly and reduced speed by 20%, just enough for those trailing vessels to eventually catch up. Not as allies, not as a team, but perhaps as witnesses, he murmured to himself, fingers drumming on the silver bullets arranged precisely on the console before him. Witnesses to what one hunter, with the right weapons and the right knowledge, could do to monsters that hid in darkness. He would test this, allow 5 of them to join him, the most skilled, the most driven, those with the most personal reasons to hate the brief. The rest would be sent elsewhere, to spread the truth and the methods across the vampire-infested sectors. A loose network of hunters all operating independently but with shared purpose. The thought triggered something in Holt's memory. Ancient Earth stories of vampires slayers working alone yet united by common knowledge, common weapons, common enemies. His quantum spurs flared crimson as he opened the ship's weapons locker. Inside lay his carefully prepared arsenal. Silver-tipped ammunition, concentrated compounds derived from earth plants known for repelling evil, specialized equipment designed to generate artificial ultraviolet radiation. The Night Code had no answers for the brief, but humanity's oldest legends did. Holt closed the locker and returned to the cockpit. On his navigation display, the 6 pursuing vessels adjusted their course to match his. He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the strange rhythm of his altered heartbeat. The brief had meant to break him, to study him, to feed on him. Instead, they had forged something new, neither fully human nor brief, but a hybrid predator with the skills of a knight and the instincts of an apex hunter. If he truly was the Crimson Hunter of their legends, then so be it. He would become the monster that monsters feared. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. For the 35,624, he whispered, a prayer and a promise and a declaration of war all in one. No mercy. No quarter. No survivors. His quantum spurs pulsed in agreement, bathing the cockpit in blood-red light, as the ship raced toward Volkmar Prime, toward the heart of the Vampire Empire and its inevitable reckoning. The tactical scout vessel's proximity alarms screamed as Elijah Holt dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Volkmar system. Before him stretched the ancestral homeworld of the brief, a blood-red planet wreathed in perpetual twilight, its surface dotted with the bone-white spires of ancient temple complexes. Holt's crimson quantum spurs pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat as he studied the sensor readings. Orbital defense platforms, patrol squadrons, ground-based energy weapons. The vampires had turned their breeding world into a fortress, protected by centuries of accumulated military technology. He activated the ship's communications array, broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously: military channels, civilian bands, emergency networks, even the encrypted frequencies used by smugglers and pirates. "This is Major Elijah Holt. I am engaging brief forces at Volkmar Prime, coordinates 77 Mark 49. The hunt begins now." No tactical data, no strategic objectives, no coordination protocols, just location and intent, transmitted across human space like a war cry echoing through the void. Holt cut the transmission and accelerated toward the planet, his ship's engines burning at maximum output. The proximity sensors detected the first brief patrol vessels moving to intercept, their sleek black hulls emerging from behind one of Volkmar's moons, like predators materializing from shadow. "Come on, then," he whispered, silver bullets arranged in neat rows across his console. His quantum spurs flared crimson, bathing the cockpit in blood-red light. "Let's see how well vampires fight in the daylight." The first engagement lasted 17 seconds. Holt's enhanced reflexes, honed by decades of night training and sharpened by months of focused hatred, allowed him to outmaneuver vessels twice his ship's size. His conventional ammunition found its mark with lethal precision, punching through the brief hulls and causing catastrophic decompression that killed the vampire crews instantly. 3 patrol vessels destroyed. Holt continued his descent toward the planet's surface, hunting for the temple complexes where he knew the high priests conducted their blood rituals. Behind him, space began to fill with ships. Malcolm Vega had been running a mining operation in the Kepler belt when Holt's transmission reached him. 3 years ago, brief raiders had swept through his home colony of New Tuscany, feeding on the population in ritualistic displays that lasted for weeks. His wife and 2 daughters had been among the victims, their deaths broadcast across the colony's communication networks as a demonstration of brief superiority. Vega's mining vessel carried enough industrial-grade explosives to crack asteroids, plus the military surplus weapons he'd acquired for protection against raiders. His crew of 47 miners had all lost someone to the vampires. Family, friends, entire communities consumed to feed the brief's blood religion. "All hands," he announced over the ship's intercom. "We're changing course for Volkmar Prime. Time to settle accounts." Vega's transport was one of hundreds, no, thousands, converging on the vampire homeworld. Merchant vessels from the outer colonies, their holds packed with weapons and their crews driven by personal vendettas. Industrial ships converted to carry military-grade firepower. Even private yachts belonging to wealthy colonists whose estates had been raided, now bristling with defensive systems and crewed by survivors who'd learned to fight. No central command, no unified strategy, just raw hatred channeled into kinetic force, scattered across the system like a swarm of angry hornets descending on a high. The constitutional right to bear arms had never been infringed in human space, and 3 centuries of frontier expansion had produced a civilian population that was armed, trained, and more than capable of conducting their own military operations when the regular forces proved inadequate. Holt's ship shuddered under defensive fire from an orbital platform as he swept low over Volkmar's surface. The landscape below revealed the truth of brief civilization. Massive temple complexes connected by underground tunnels, their architecture designed to block natural sunlight while channeling artificial illumination in patterns that hurt human eyes to observe. This was a world built for creatures of darkness, a planet-sized crypt where vampires had dwelt for millennia, feeding on whatever sentient species they could capture and transport here for their rituals. Holt targeted the largest temple complex and dove toward it, ignoring the defensive fire that lanced up from the surface. His ship's hull plates glowed cherry red from atmospheric friction and energy impacts, but he held course with the single-minded focus of a predator closing on wounded prey. At the last possible moment, he pulled up, releasing his entire payload of conventional explosives directly into the temple's central spire. The ancient structure, built to withstand orbital bombardment, cracked and collapsed as the munitions found structural weaknesses that the breath had never anticipated. Secondary explosions rippled outward as stored blood reserves, the life essence of thousands of victims, ignited in chain reactions that turned the temple into a crematorium for its vampire inhabitants. Holt's quantum spurs flared with satisfaction as he pulled his damaged ship into a strafing run on the next complex. Behind him, the first civilian vessels were entering the atmosphere, their weapons already seeking targets. Captain Rebecca Torres commanded a converted freight hauler from the agricultural worlds of the Centauri sector. Her ship carried 32 colonists who had armed themselves after brief raids devastated 3 farming communities in their system. They'd been preparing to defend their remaining settlements when Holt's transmission reached them. "There's the real target," Torres announced to her crew as they dropped into Volkmar's atmosphere. "We're not playing defense anymore." Her ship's cargo bays had been retrofitted with missile launchers and beam weapons purchased from military surplus dealers. The colonists aboard had trained with these systems for months, knowing that eventually they would need to take the fight to the creatures that hunted their families. Torres selected a temple complex that sensors indicated was actively occupied and began her attack run. Around her, dozens of other civilian vessels were conducting similar assaults, each crew following their own tactical instincts while contributing to the larger pattern of destruction. The Brief had built their defenses to counter organized military strikes, coordinated attacks that followed established doctrine and could be predicted through strategic analysis. They were not prepared for thousands of independent operators attacking simultaneously, each following personal motivations rather than military logic. The orbital defense platforms had been designed to repel organized military assaults, coordinated attacks that followed predictable patterns and could be countered through established defensive protocols. They were not prepared for many thousands of independent vessels attacking from every conceivable angle, each following its own tactical doctrine. Commander Tamarum, ancient even by Brief standards, watched his defensive network crumble from the command center of the primary orbital station. The attacking humans showed no coordination, no strategic planning, no adherence to military logic. They simply attacked whatever targets presented themselves, adapting instantly when their initial approaches failed. "How many vessels?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Unknown, Commander. New contacts appear every few minutes. Estimate 17,000 and rising." 17,000 ships? Tamarun's fangs extended involuntarily. "Impossible. The humans lack the fleet strength for such an assault." "Not warships, Commander. Civilian vessels, mining ships, agricultural transports, personal craft, all armed with military weapons but operating independently." Dexter studied the tactical display, trying to find patterns in the chaos. There were none. Each human vessel followed its own agenda, striking at targets that seemed to hold personal significance rather than strategic value. Some focused on orbital defenses. Others targeted specific temple complexes on the surface. Still others hunted brief patrol squadrons with the persistence of natural predators. "Where is their command ship?" he asked. "Their fleet coordination center?" "Unknown. They appear to be following the lead of a single tactical scout, the vessel that initiated hostilities." On the main viewer Tamarun, watch that same scout vessel carve through another temple complex, leaving destruction in its wake. The ship's pilot displayed a level of skill that suggested night training, but the tactics were wrong. Too aggressive, too personal, unconstrained by the honor codes that had made human knights predictable opponents. "All stations concentrate fire on the lead vessel," Tamarun ordered. "Eliminate their inspiration and the attack will collapse." But even as he gave the command, Tamara knew it was already too late. The humans had brought their war to Vokmar Prime itself, and they fought with the fury of a species that had finally learned the true nature of their enemy. Holt's damaged ship limped between the towering spires of another temple complex, conventional rounds streaming from its remaining weapons. The crimson glow from his quantum spurs had intensified during the battle, casting everything in shades of blood and shadow. His enhanced memory cataloged each target destroyed, each vampire killed, adding to the tally he carried from Tolok. But these weren't prisoners dying under torture. These were the monsters themselves, burning in their own sanctuaries as righteous fire consumed their ancient refuges. 35,624, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of combat. This is for you. A proximity alarm warned him of incoming missiles, but Holt's reflexes had evolved beyond human norms during his months in captivity. He rolled the ship between two temple spires, using the ancient architecture as cover, while his weapons found the missile launcher and silenced it with precise fire. Around him, the sky filled with the contrails of descending ships as more human vessels entered the atmosphere. Each pilot or crew brought their own reasons for being here, their own lists of the dead, their own need for the kind of justice that military courts and prisoner exchanges could never provide. Holt's comm system crackled with fragments of transmissions, battle cries in a dozen languages, tactical updates between crews who had never met but recognized each other as kindred spirits, last messages from pilots whose ships burned too brightly to survive their final attacks. Is the blood storage facility in Sector 7? Requesting support at the ritual chamber, these bastards are. Tell my family I kept my promise. Conventional rounds working fine against their hulls. The chatter painted a picture of systematic destruction carried out by thousands of independent operators, each contributing to a larger pattern that no single mind had designed. It was chaos weaponized against order, individual fury combined into collective devastation. Holt smiled for the first time since Tolok as he watched another temple complex collapse beneath sustained fire from a converted agricultural hauler. The vampires' greatest strength, their rigid hierarchy and ancient protocols, had become their fatal weakness against an enemy that refused to follow any rules at all. In the deepest vault of the primary temple complex, High Priest Arenicus consulted archives that predated human spaceflight by thousands of years. The crimson-clad figure from his race's most ancient nightmares had finally appeared, just as the prophecies had warned. "The Crimson Hunter walks among us," he intoned to his assembled acolytes, each vampire carrying the weight of centuries. "The one who would turn our own nature against us." Through the vault's observation systems, he watched human vessels systematically destroying everything his species had built over millennia of conquest and feeding. The attackers showed no interest in capture or interrogation. They simply killed, efficiently and without mercy, as if they had finally understood that some enemies could not be reasoned with or reformed. "What are your orders, High Priest?" asked one of the younger acolytes, though younger in this case meant barely 3 centuries old. Arenicus's fangs extended as he accessed the temple's emergency protocols. "Activate the blood reserves, all of them. If we must fall, we will take as many of the cattle with us as possible." Deep beneath the temple, storage tanks containing the concentrated life essence of millions of victims began to pressurize. The brief had always known this day might come, when their prey species finally evolved beyond mere resistance into something approaching their own predatory nature. But Arenicus had not anticipated the particular form that evolution would take. The humans weren't becoming vampires themselves. They had become something worse, vampire killers, specifically adapted to hunt and destroy creatures of darkness. The High Priest touched the ancient scars on his throat, marks left by feeding rituals conducted when his species was young and still learning to channel their bloodlust productively. Soon, those rituals would end forever. along with the civilization that had sustained them for longer than human history. Above the vault, explosions shook the temple as another wave of human attackers found their mark. Holt's ship finally died over the 7th temple complex he'd targeted, its engines failing after taking one hit too many. He guided the vessel into a controlled crash, using the ship itself as a final weapon against the vampire structure below. The impact sent shock waves through the ancient building, cracking foundations that had stood for millennia and causing critical systems to fail throughout the complex. As the ship's power core went critical, the explosion carved a crater 50 meters deep and twice as wide, taking most of the temple with it. Holt emerged from the wreckage, his armor intact but his weapons limited to what he'd salvaged from the crash. The silver bullets in his sidearm would have to be enough for whatever came next. Around him, Volkmar Prime burned. The perpetual twilight had been replaced by the orange glow of burning temples and crashing ships. Human vessels continued to arrive, their crews adding to the systematic destruction of everything the Brief had built on their homeworld. Holt's quantum spurs flared crimson as he began walking toward the next temple complex, the one his ship's sensors had identified as the primary ritual center. Whatever high priests remained alive would be there, conducting their final ceremonies before the inevitable end. He had silver bullets for all of them. As he walked, his enhanced hearing caught the sound of massive engines approaching from high orbit. Not the improvised weapons of civilian vessels or the standard drives of converted transports, but the distinctive quantum signatures of Knight-class vessels. Holt paused, checking his armor's sensor readings. Multiple contacts approaching fast, large vessels with the energy signatures of full Knight battle groups. Knight Command had finally arrived, bringing their codes and their protocols and their insistence on civilized warfare against creatures that had never understood civilization as anything other than a convenient feeding arrangement. They would try to stop this, try to restore order, try to return the war to something manageable and honorable and, ultimately, futile. Holt's quantum spurs pulsed blood red against the burning sky as he resumed walking toward the central temple. Behind him, space filled with the blue trails of proper knights, their quantum technology casting its traditional glow as they prepared to restore their version of military discipline to this chaotic battlefield. They were too late. The convergence had begun, the hunt was in full swing, and the vampire's ancient homeworld would burn, whether Knight Command approved or not. The only question now was whether the arriving knights would try to save their enemies from the justice they so richly deserved. Holt checked his weapon's ammunition count, 7 silver bullets remaining, and continued his methodical advance toward the heart of darkness, ready to finish what 35,624 deaths had started. The real battle was about to begin. The ancient stone beneath Holt's boots crunched as he advanced through the rubble of collapsed temple walls. His crimson quantum spurs left glowing footprints in the dust, each step marking his passage through what had once been the sacred heart of Brief civilization. The perpetual twilight of Volkmar Prime flickered between natural darkness and the orange glow of burning structures, casting shifting shadows that danced across the devastation. His armor's sensors detected movement ahead, Brief's survivors attempting to regroup in the temple's lower levels. The quantum spurs pulsed brighter as he quickened his pace, silver bullets ready in his sidearm, 7 rounds. He would make them count. The first vampire emerged from behind a fallen pillar, its obsidian skin almost invisible in the shadows until yellow eyes betrayed its position. Ancient beyond human reckoning, this one bore the ritual scarification of a high-ranking priest. Holt's enhanced reflexes responded before conscious thought. The silver bullet took the creature's center mass, and it collapsed with a shriek that echoed through the ruins. 6 rounds remaining. "Command center to all units," crackled a transmission through Holt's armor comm system, picking up brief communications. "The cattle have reached the breeding sanctuaries. Evacuate the archives before..." The transmission cut to static as another civilian ship scored a direct hit on a communications array somewhere above. But Holt had heard enough. Breeding sanctuaries, the heart of their desperate attempts to perpetuate their dying race. He moved deeper into the temple complex, following the ancient corridors that led toward the underground chambers. The architecture here was older than human civilization, carved from living rock and decorated with grotesque reliefs depicting feeding rituals and blood ceremonies. The walls themselves seemed to drink in his armor's illumination, creating pools of absolute darkness between the crimson trails of his spurs. A group of 3 blocked his path. Younger vampires, their scarification patterns indicating centuries rather than millennia of age. They hissed at his approach, fangs extended, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators who had never known fear. Until now. Holt's first shot took the leftmost vampire in the throat, the silver bullet causing a reaction that burned through undead flesh like acid. The second round found its mark as the center vampire lunged, silver punching through its chest and erupting from its back in a spray of dark ichor. The third vampire actually reached him before the final bullet dropped it 3 feet away, close enough that its claws scratched sparks from his armor. 3 rounds remaining. The corridor opened into a vast chamber carved from the planet's bedrock. What Holt saw there would haunt even his enhanced memory. Row upon row of medical equipment, surgical tables, and containment pods stretching into the darkness. The failed experiments of a dying race, desperate to find a way to extend their existence through hybrid offspring. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows over examination tables stained with the blood of human prisoners. Monitors still displayed vital signs from subjects long since dead. In the center of it all stood a massive apparatus that could only be described as a breeding chamber, a grotesque fusion of medical technology and ritual altar designed to force biological compatibility between species that neither God or nature had ever intended to merge. Sector Command, this is Research Division. Another transmission filtered through the static. The breeding programs have been terminated. All genetic material secured. Recommend immediate evacuation of... Holt switched to a different frequency, picking up human chatter from the chaos above. Bob's here. I've got visual on the big temple complex. Looks like someone's already inside. Bigoted to all units. The orbital platforms are down. Repeat, orbital defenses are neutralized. Unknown. Night vessel crashed near the primary structure. Anyone have eyes on the pilot? This is Commander Caldwell, approaching from Grid 7-7. All civilian units be advised official military assets are entering the system. Recommend you maintain current operations until further notice. Military assets. The regular forces were finally arriving, bringing their regulations and their insistence on proper rules of engagement. Holt's quantum spurs flared as he considered the implications. Soon, some admiral would order a halt to the destruction, demanding surrender negotiations and prisoner protocols for creatures that had never shown mercy to anyone. A sound from deeper in the chamber drew his attention, the labored breathing of something large and ancient hiding in the shadows beyond the breeding apparatus. Holt advanced cautiously, his remaining bullets ready. What he found in the darkness was High Priest Arenikis himself, wounded and bleeding from shrapnel that had torn through even his reinforced hide. The vampire's yellow eyes tracked Holt's approach with the resignation of a creature that had finally met its match. "The Crimson Hunter," Arenikis wheezed, dark blood frothing from his mouth. "The prophecy speaks true. From among the cattle, a predator to hunt predators." "I'm not interested in your mythology," Holt replied, raising his sidearm. "I'm here for justice." "Justice?" The ancient vampire's laugh was a wet, rasping sound. "You destroy a dying race. We have not successfully bred in 3 centuries. The youngest of us has seen 400 summers. We are already extinct. You merely hasten the inevitable." Holt's finger tightened on the trigger, but something in the vampire's words made him pause. Then why continue the experiments? Why torture human prisoners if you knew it was futile? Because the alternative is accepting extinction. Aranikes struggled to sit upright against the machinery that had consumed his species' final years. We are the last generation, human. When we fall, 10 millennia of civilization dies with us. The rituals, the blood chronology, the songs of the hunt that predate your species' first words, and 35,624 humans died for your vanity, Holt said, his voice flat with contained rage. 35,600. Aranikes' eyes widened. You remember them all. Every name, every death, every single one. Holt's quantum spurs pulsed brighter. Every face, every scream, every moment of agony you inflicted on people who had families, children, futures. The vampire high priest stared at him with something approaching wonder. The prophecy spoke of this as well. The hunter who would carry the weight of all the fallen, who would remember what we would forget. I don't care about your prophecies, Holt repeated, but his voice carried less conviction than before. The weight of 35,624 names pressed against his consciousness, demanding vengeance for their bearer. No, Aranikes agreed. You care only for the dead, as is right, as is just. The ancient vampire closed his eyes. We fed on your species because we could. We tortured because it amused us. We experimented because we were desperate, all of it evil, all of it deserving of the fire you have brought to our world. Holt's sidearm remained trained on the dying vampire. Then you accept judgment? I accept inevitability. Aranikes opened his eyes one final time. But know this, Crimson Hunter, when the last of us falls, something will be lost from this galaxy. We are monsters, yes, but we are also the repository of knowledge older than your civilizations. When we die, that dies with us. Good, Holt said, and pulled the trigger. The silver bullet took the high priest between the eyes, and 10,000 years of vampiric civilization died with the ancient creature's final breath. 2 rounds remaining. Above, the sounds of battle intensified as more human ships entered the fray. Holt's comm system picked up increasing chatter from official military channels. Admiral Draculesti to all vessels, this is 7th Fleet Command. All unauthorized vessels are ordered to withdraw immediately and submit to military coordination. Negative, Admiral, came a response from one of the civilian ships. We didn't come this far to be told to stand down now. Captain, you are operating in violation of... We're operating in violation of nothing. These are our weapons, our ships, our fight. We'll finish what we started. Be advised, 7th Fleet is prepared to enforce compliance with... The transmission was suddenly flooded with rapid-fire Mandarin as thousands of new contacts appeared on the edge of the system. Chinese voices filled every frequency, battle cries, tactical coordination, prayers and curses mixing into a linguistic storm that overwhelmed the comm networks. The voices start rattling off a bunch of things in Chinese, but Holt can't make heads or tails of it. He doesn't commit any of his suit's translator power to it either. He had a war to fight here and now. The official military channels devolved into chaos as hundreds of civilian captains responded simultaneously in multiple languages, their words blending into a cacophony of defiance and determination from across human space. Holt climbed back through the temple ruins toward the surface, leaving the breeding chambers and their obscene machinery behind. The fight above was entering a new phase, and he intended to be part of it. Whatever pompous admiral thought they could impose order on this righteous chaos would learn the same lesson the brief were learning. Some enemies deserved no mercy, and some wars could not be fought by committee. As he emerged from the underground complex, the sky above Volkmar Prime told the story of systematic destruction. Hundreds of temple complexes burned across the planet's surface, Orbital defenses drifted as lifeless debris. The perpetual twilight had been replaced by the hellish glow of a civilization in its death throes. And now, descending from high orbit in perfect formation, came the ships of the official fleet, battlecruisers and carriers bearing the insignia of legitimate military authority, their quantum drives casting regulation blue trails across the burning sky. They would try to stop this, try to save the remaining vampires in the name of proper procedure and civilized warfare. Holt's quantum spurs pulsed blood red against the night as he watched the fleet's approach. His sidearm held 2 silver bullets, not enough for what was coming. But then again, he had never planned to fight this war alone. The real test was about to begin. The tactical scout vessel's proximity alarm screamed as Elijah Holt dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Volkmar system. Before him stretched the ancestral homeworld of the Brief, a blood-red planet wreathed in perpetual twilight, its surface dotted with the bone-white spires of ancient temple complexes. Holt's crimson quantum spurs pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat as he studied the sensor readings. Orbital defense platforms, patrol squadrons, ground-based energy weapons. The vampires had turned their breeding world into a fortress, protected by centuries of accumulated military technology. He activated the ship's communications array, broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously: military channels, civilian bands, emergency networks, even the encrypted frequencies used by smugglers and pirates. "This is Major Elijah Holt. I am engaging brief forces at Volkmar Prime, coordinates 77 Mark 49. The hunt begins now." No tactical data, no strategic objectives, no coordination protocols, just location and intent, transmitted across human space like a war cry echoing through the void. Holt cut the transmission and accelerated toward the planet, his ship's engines burning at maximum output. The proximity sensors detected the first brief patrol vessels moving to intercept, their sleek black hulls emerging from behind one of Volkmar's moons, like predators materializing from shadow. "Come on, then," he whispered, silver bullets arranged in neat rows across his console. His quantum spurs flared crimson, bathing the cockpit in blood-red light. "Let's see how well vampires fight in the daylight." The first engagement lasted 17 seconds. Holt's enhanced reflexes, honed by decades of night training and sharpened by months of focused hatred, allowed him to outmaneuver vessels twice his ship's size. His conventional ammunition found its mark with lethal precision, punching through the brief hulls and causing catastrophic decompression that killed the vampire crews instantly. 3 patrol vessels destroyed. Holt continued his descent toward the planet's surface, hunting for the temple complexes where he knew the high priests conducted their blood rituals. Behind him, space began to fill with ships. Malcolm Vega had been running a mining operation in the Kepler Belt when Holt's transmission reached him. 3 years ago, brief raiders had swept through his home colony of New Tuscany, feeding on the population in ritualistic displays that lasted for weeks. His wife and 2 daughters had been among the victims, their deaths broadcast across the colony's communication networks as a demonstration of brief superiority. Vega's mining vessel carried enough industrial-grade explosives to crack asteroids, plus the military surplus weapons he'd acquired for protection against raiders. His crew of 47 miners had all lost someone to the vampires. Family, friends, entire communities consumed to feed the Brief's blood religion. "All hands," he announced over the ship's intercom. "We're changing course for Volkmar Prime. Time to settle accounts." Vega's transport was one of hundreds, no, thousands, converging on the vampire homeworld. Merchant vessels from the outer colonies, their holds packed with weapons and their crews driven by personal vendettas. Industrial ships converted to carry military-grade firepower. Even private yachts belonging to wealthy colonists whose estates had been raided, now bristling with defensive systems and crewed by survivors who'd learned to fight. No central command, no unified strategy, just raw hatred channeled into kinetic force, scattered across the system like a swarm of angry hornets descending on a high. The constitutional right to bear arms had never been infringed in human space, and 3 centuries of frontier expansion had produced a civilian population that was armed, trained, and more than capable of conducting their own military operations when the regular forces proved inadequate. Holt's ship shuddered under defensive fire from an orbital platform as he swept low over Volkmar's surface. The landscape below revealed the truth of brief civilization. Massive temple complexes connected by underground tunnels, their architecture designed to block natural sunlight while channeling artificial illumination in patterns that hurt human eyes to observe. This was a world built for creatures of darkness, a planet-sized crypt where vampires had dwelt for millennia, feeding on whatever sentient species they could capture and transport here for their rituals. Holt targeted the largest temple complex and dove toward it, ignoring the defensive fire that lanced up from the surface. His ship's hull plates glowed cherry red from atmospheric friction and energy impacts, but he held course with the single-minded focus of a predator closing on wounded prey. At the last possible moment, he pulled up, releasing his entire payload of conventional explosives directly into the temple's central spire. The ancient structure, built to withstand orbital bombardment, cracked and collapsed as the munitions found structural weaknesses that the breath had never anticipated. Secondary explosions rippled outward as stored blood reserves, the life essence of thousands of victims, ignited in chain reactions that turned the temple into a crematorium for its vampire inhabitants. Holt's quantum spurs flared with satisfaction as he pulled his damaged ship into a strafing run on the next complex. Behind him, the first civilian vessels were entering the atmosphere, their weapons already seeking targets. Captain Rebecca Torres commanded a converted freight hauler from the agricultural worlds of the Centauri sector. Her ship carried 32 colonists who had armed themselves after brief raids devastated 3 farming communities in their system. They'd been preparing to defend their remaining settlements when Holt's transmission reached them. "There's the real target," Torres announced to her crew as they dropped into Volkmar's atmosphere. "We're not playing defense anymore." Her ship's cargo bays had been retrofitted with missile launchers and beam weapons purchased from military surplus dealers. The colonists aboard had trained with these systems for months, knowing that eventually they would need to take the fight to the creatures that hunted their families. Torres selected a temple complex that sensors indicated was actively occupied and began her attack run. Around her, dozens of other civilian vessels were conducting similar assaults, each crew following their own tactical instincts while contributing to the larger pattern of destruction. The brief had built their defenses to counter organized military strikes, coordinated attacks that followed established doctrine and could be predicted through strategic analysis. They were not prepared for thousands of independent operators attacking simultaneously, each following personal motivations rather than military logic. The orbital defense platforms had been designed to repel organized military assaults, coordinated attacks that followed predictable patterns and could be countered through established defensive protocols. They were not prepared for many thousands of independent vessels attacking from every conceivable angle, each following its own tactical doctrine. Commander Tamarum, ancient even by brief standards, watched his defensive network crumble from the command center of the primary orbital station. The attacking humans showed no coordination, no strategic planning, no adherence to military logic. They simply attacked whatever targets presented themselves, adapting instantly when their initial approaches failed. "How many vessels?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Unknown, Commander. New contacts appear every few minutes. Estimate 17,000 and rising." 17,000 ships? Tamarun's fangs extended involuntarily. "Impossible. The humans lack the fleet strength for such an assault." "Not warships, Commander. Civilian vessels, mining ships, agricultural transports, personal craft, all armed with military weapons but operating independently." Dexter studied the tactical display, trying to find patterns in the chaos. There were none. Each human vessel followed its own agenda, striking at targets that seemed to hold personal significance rather than strategic value. Some focused on orbital defenses. Others targeted specific temple complexes on the surface. Still others hunted brief patrol squadrons with the persistence of natural predators. "Where is their command ship?" he asked. "Their fleet coordination center?" "Unknown. They appear to be following the lead of a single tactical scout, the vessel that initiated hostilities." On the main viewer Tamaran, watch that same scout vessel carve through another temple complex, leaving destruction in its wake. The ship's pilot displayed a level of skill that suggested night training, but the tactics were wrong. Too aggressive, too personal, unconstrained by the honor codes that had made human knights predictable opponents. "All stations concentrate fire on the lead vessel," Tamaran ordered. "Eliminate their inspiration and the attack will collapse." But even as he gave the command, Tamaran knew it was already too late. The humans had brought their war to Vokmar Prime itself, and they fought with the fury of a species that had finally learned the true nature of their enemy. Holt's damaged ship limped between the towering spires of another temple complex, conventional rounds streaming from its remaining weapons. The crimson glow from his quantum spurs had intensified during the battle, casting everything in shades of blood and shadow. His enhanced memory catalogued each target destroyed, each vampire killed, adding to the tally he carried from Tolok. But these weren't prisoners dying under torture. These were the monsters themselves, burning in their own sanctuaries as righteous fire consumed their ancient refuges. 35,624, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of combat. "This is for you." A proximity alarm warned him of incoming missiles, but Holt's reflexes had evolved beyond human norms during his months in captivity. He rolled the ship between two temple spires, using the ancient architecture as cover, while his weapons found the missile launcher and silenced it with precise fire. Around him, the sky filled with the contrails of descending ships as more human vessels entered the atmosphere. Each pilot or crew brought their own reasons for being here, their own lists of the dead, their own need for the kind of justice that military courts and prisoner exchanges could never provide. Holt's comm system crackled with fragments of transmissions, battle cries in a dozen languages, tactical updates between crews who had never met but recognized each other as kindred spirits, last messages from pilots whose ships burned too brightly to survive their final attacks. "Is the blood storage facility in Sector 7? Requesting support at the ritual chamber, these bastards are. Tell my family I kept my promise. Conventional rounds working fine against their hulls." The chatter painted a picture of systematic destruction carried out by thousands of independent operators, each contributing to a larger pattern that no single mind had designed. It was chaos weaponized against order, individual fury combined into collective devastation. Holt smiled for the first time since Tolok as he watched another temple complex collapse beneath sustained fire from a converted agricultural hauler. The vampires' greatest strength, their rigid hierarchy and ancient protocols, had become their fatal weakness against an enemy that refused to follow any rules at all. In the deepest vault of the primary temple complex, High Priest Arenicus consulted archives that predated human spaceflight by thousands of years. The crimson-clad figure from his race's most ancient nightmares had finally appeared, just as the prophecies had warned. "The Crimson Hunter walks among us," he intoned to his assembled acolytes, each vampire carrying the weight of centuries. "The one who would turn our own nature against us." Through the vault's observation systems, he watched human vessels systematically destroying everything his species had built over millennia of conquest and feeding. The attackers showed no interest in capture or interrogation. They simply killed, efficiently and without mercy, as if they had finally understood that some enemies could not be reasoned with or reformed. "What are your orders, High Priest?" asked one of the younger acolytes, though younger in this case meant barely 3 centuries old. Arenikos's fangs extended as he accessed the temple's emergency protocols. Activate the blood reserves, all of them. If we must fall, we will take as many of the cattle with us as possible. Deep beneath the temple, storage tanks containing the concentrated life essence of millions of victims began to pressurize. The Brief had always known this day might come, when their prey species finally evolved beyond mere resistance into something approaching their own predatory nature. But Arenikos had not anticipated the particular form that evolution would take. The humans weren't becoming vampires themselves, they had become something worse. Vampire killers, specifically adapted to hunt and destroy creatures of darkness. The high priest touched the ancient scars on his throat, marks left by feeding rituals conducted when his species was young and still learning to channel their bloodlust productively. Soon, those rituals would end forever, along with the civilization that had sustained them for longer than human history. Above the vault, explosions shook the temple as another wave of human attackers found their mark. Holt's ship finally died over the 7th temple complex he'd targeted, its engines failing after taking one hit too many. He guided the vessel into a controlled crash, using the ship itself as a final weapon against the vampire structure below. The impact sent shockwaves through the ancient building, cracking foundations that had stood for millennia and causing critical systems to fail throughout the complex. As the ship's power core went critical, the explosion carved a crater 50 meters deep and twice as wide, taking most of the temple with it. Holt emerged from the wreckage, his armor intact but his weapons limited to what he'd salvaged from the crash. The silver bullets in his sidearm would have to be enough for whatever came next. Around him, Volkmar Prime burned. The perpetual twilight had been replaced by the orange glow of burning temples and crashing ships. Human vessels continued to arrive, their crews adding to the systematic destruction of everything the Brief had built on their homeworld. Holt's quantum spurs flared crimson as he began walking toward the next temple complex, the one his ship's sensors had identified as the primary ritual center. Whatever high priests remained alive would be there, conducting their final ceremonies before the inevitable end. He had silver bullets for all of them. As he walked, his enhanced hearing caught the sound of massive engines approaching from high orbit, not the improvised weapons of civilian vessels or the standard drives of converted transports, but the distinctive quantum signatures of Knight-class vessels. Holt paused, checking his armor's sensor readings. Multiple contacts approaching fast, large vessels with the energy signatures of full Knight battle groups. Knight Command had finally arrived, bringing their codes and their protocols and their insistence on civilized warfare against creatures that had never understood civilization as anything other than a convenient feeding arrangement. They would try to stop this, try to restore order, try to return the war to something manageable and honorable and, ultimately, futile. Holt's quantum spurs pulsed blood red against the burning sky as he resumed walking toward the central temple. Behind him, space filled with the blue trails of proper knights, their quantum technology casting its traditional glow as they prepared to restore their version of military discipline to this chaotic battlefield. They were too late. The convergence had begun, the hunt was in full swing, and the vampire's ancient homeworld would burn, whether Knight Command approved or not. The only question now was whether the arriving knights would try to save their enemies from the justice they so richly deserved. Holt checked his weapon's ammunition count, 7 silver bullets remaining, and continued his methodical advance toward the heart of darkness, ready to finish what 35,624 deaths had started. The real battle was about to begin. Admiral Draculesti's flagship descended through Volkmar Prime's burning atmosphere like an avenging angel, its hull gleaming with the polished perfection of regulation military authority. Through the bridge's forward viewport, he watched the chaos below with barely contained fury. Thousands of civilian vessels continued their systematic destruction of the vampire homeworld. their weapons carving through ancient architecture while completely ignoring his orders. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice tight with unease, "ground forces are requesting confirmation of engagement orders. They're reluctant to fire on civilian targets." "Reluctant?" Draculesti's voice carried the ice of absolute authority. "They have their orders. All unauthorized combatants are to be detained or neutralized if they resist." But even as he spoke, the Admiral could see the problem developing on his tactical displays. His troops had landed at strategic points across the planet's surface, establishing containment zones around the major battle sites. Yet instead of moving to separate the civilians from their targets, many units had simply stopped. On the main viewer, a live feed from one of his ground commanders showed the reality of the situation. Captain Turner stood with his squad at the edge of a burning temple complex, watching as armed colonists systematically eliminated surviving brief vampires. The captain's face was visible through his helmet's visor, and the expression there was not one of a soldier prepared to follow orders. "Admiral," Turner's voice crackled through the comm, requesting clarification on rules of engagement. "These civilians are conducting legitimate military operations against confirmed hostile forces." "Captain, your orders are clear," Draculist replied, his knuckles white as he gripped his command chair. "Civilian forces operating without military authorization are to be contained." "Sir?" Turner's hesitation was audible across the channel. "These people lost their homes, their families. The brief conducted feeding rituals on entire colonies, millions dead across human space, and now we're supposed to stop them from getting justice?" Similar reports were flooding in from across the planet. Company commanders requesting clarification, platoon leaders asking for confirmation that they were really supposed to fire on human civilians who were fighting monsters, squad leaders simply refusing to acknowledge orders that went against every principle they'd sworn to uphold. From his position on the ruined altar, Holt watched this drama unfold with grim satisfaction. His comm system picked up fragments of the military channels, and what he heard confirmed something he'd suspected from the beginning. Most soldiers, when faced with the choice between following orders and doing what was right, would choose righteousness. Alternately, this was not righteousness. Colonel Wang's Chinese forces had spread out around his position, their weapons trained not on the approaching military units but on the temple ruins where the last brief survivors were making their stand. When a squad of 7th Fleet Marines approached their perimeter, both groups simply nodded acknowledgement and continued their respective missions. "Stand down, civilians," called out the Marine sergeant. But his heart clearly wasn't in it. "By order of Admiral Draculesti, you're ordered to cease hostilities and withdraw." Colonel Wang looked up from where she was coordinating her troops' final assault on the vampire stronghold. "Sergeant," she said in her heavily accented English, "you want to protect vampires?" The Marine's face, visible through his helmet's faceplate, twisted in distaste. "Ma'am, those are my orders." "Then follow conscience, not orders," Wang replied, turning back to her tactical display. "We finish job here. You want to stop us?" She shrugged, indicating her well-armed militia. "You try." Similar scenes were playing out across Volkmar Prime. 7th Fleet troops standing in awkward confrontation with civilian hunters, neither side particularly eager to open fire on fellow humans while actual monsters burned in the ruins around them. Admiral Draculesti's frustration reached its breaking point as another company commander reported equipment malfunctions, preventing his unit from engaging civilian targets. The Admiral's hands moved to his personal sidearm, his face flushing with barely controlled rage. "All ground units," he broadcast on all military frequencies. "This is Admiral Draculesti. Any officer who refuses to follow engagement orders will be charged with mutiny. Any enlisted personnel who fails to obey lawful commands will face court-martial. You have 60 seconds to begin containment operations." The response was immediate. and not what he'd expected. "Sir, this is Colonel Vandermeer, 3rd Marine Battalion," came a calm voice with a distinct Afrikaans accent over the comm. "With all due respect, Admiral, these orders violate the Military Code of Justice, Section 12, regarding protection of civilian populations conducting legitimate defense operations." "Colonel, you are relieved of command," Draculesti snapped. "Admiral, this is Commander Peterson, Naval Security," another voice joined in. "I must concur with Colonel Vandermeer. These civilians are engaged in lawful combat against confirmed hostile forces. The brief have killed millions across dozens of worlds. Interfering with their operations would constitute obstruction of justice." "Commander Peterson, you are also relieved?" "Sir?" came a third voice, then a fourth, then a dozen more as officers across the 7th Fleet declared their unwillingness to fire on civilians who were fighting vampires that had slaughtered entire colonies. "We respectfully decline to follow orders that contradict our oaths to protect human populations." Draculesti stared at his communication display as it filled with similar declarations. In the span of minutes, nearly half his command structure had effectively mutinied, not by attacking their superior officer, but by simply refusing to shoot their fellow humans. "Fine," the Admiral said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "If the ground forces lack the spine to follow orders, fleet assets will handle containment directly." He turned to his tactical officer. "Target the largest concentration of civilian vessels. Prepare to fire." The tactical officer's face went pale. "Sir, those are human ships, civilian transports with minimal shielding." "They are combatants in violation of military authority," Draculesti replied coldly. "Fire, on my mark." But before the order could be given, every alarm on the flagship's bridge began screaming at once. The main viewer shifted to show new contacts appearing at the edge of the system, not the converted civilian vessels or standard military craft, but ships that made the very air seem to sing with their presence. "Sir!" The sensor operator's voice cracked with disbelief. "Multiple contacts bearing 27 Mark 45. Energy signatures are impossible. They're showing quantum spur resonance patterns off every scale." On the viewer, the approaching ships resolved into formations that took Draculesti's breath away. Sleek vessels whose hulls seemed to blur at the edges, leaving trails of blue fire across the void. And on each ship's prow, proud and defiant, blazed the lone star of Texas. "This is Knight Commander Daniel Reynolds of the Texas Knights Expeditionary Force." A voice filled the bridge, calm, authoritative, carrying the unmistakable accent of genuine Texas nobility. "Admiral Draculesti, you will stand down immediately and cease all hostile actions against civilian populations." Draculesti's face flushed purple. "Knight Commander, these civilians are operating in violation of—" "Admiral," Reynolds' voice cut through his protests like a quantum blade through armor. "We've been monitoring your communications. You just ordered your fleet to fire on unarmed civilian vessels engaged in legitimate combat operations against confirmed vampire forces." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems. Every officer present understood what they were witnessing: the arrival of the Texas Knights, the most elite military force in human space, coming to confront one of their own admirals. "Furthermore," Reynolds continued, his voice taking on that particular edge that indicated a Texas Knight at the limits of his patience, "we have confirmed reports that Major Elijah Holt is operating on the surface, a decorated knight who was presumed killed in action after sacrificing himself to save his command." Down on Volkmar Prime's surface, Holt felt something stir in his chest as he heard Reynolds' voice. He knew that voice. Commander Reynolds had been his instructor at Knight Academy, one of the finest warriors ever to wear the quantum spurs. "Knight Commander," Holt activated his comm system, his own voice carrying across all frequencies. "This is Major Holt, confirming my status and current operations." Major. Reynolds' reply carried genuine warmth despite the formal protocol. Good to hear your voice, son. We've been tracking the beacon from your armor. Are you combat effective? Affirmative, Commander. Currently engaged in final mop-up operations against remaining vampire forces. Understood. Continue your mission, Major. We'll handle the situation up here. The exchange sent shockwaves through the 7th Fleet. Here was confirmation that the legendary Crimson Hunter, the rogue knight who had sparked this crusade, was not only alive, but operating with the tacit approval of Knight Command itself. Admiral Draculesti's voice shook with barely contained fury. Knight Commander, that man is a rogue operative who has violated every regulation. Admiral, Reynolds' voice dropped to absolute zero. That man is a Texas knight who spent 6 months in vampire captivity watching 35,624 of his fellow prisoners die under torture. That's just what he witnessed personally. The breathe have killed millions, entire colonies fed upon billions of lives destroyed across human space. He escaped, initiated the largest POW rescue in military history, and is now completing his mission to eliminate the vampire threat. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. If you have a problem with his methods, I suggest you take it up with the vampires. Oh wait, he's killing them all. Around the 7th Fleet's formation, the night vessels moved with that fluid grace that defied physics, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire that formed protective patterns around the civilian ships below. It was a clear message. Anyone who wanted to harm the vampire hunters would have to go through the Texas Knights first. Admiral Draculesti, Reynolds' voice carried the authority of centuries of Texas tradition. You have exactly 1 minute to order your fleet to stand down and withdraw to minimum safe distance. After that, we'll consider any hostile action against civilian populations to be a violation of the Knight's oath to protect the innocent. You don't have the authority, Dracules began. I have the authority of a Texas Knight defending innocent people from an officer who just ordered his fleet to fire on unarmed civilians. Reynolds cut him off. That's all the authority I need. On the surface, Holt watched the confrontation develop with grim satisfaction. Around him, Colonel Wang's forces had completed their assault on the temple complex, the last vampire defenders falling to the combined fury of human determination and Chinese precision. Similar reports were flooding in from across the planet, Captain Reagan confirming the destruction of the blood storage facilities, various militia commanders reporting the elimination of brief strongholds, the systematic extermination of a species that had fed on millions upon millions of human lives. Major Holt, came Reynolds' voice on a private channel, what's your assessment of the ground situation? Holt looked out across the burning ruins of Volkmar Prime, his crimson quantum spurs casting blood-red light over the devastation. Mission nearly complete, Commander. Estimate 97% vampire casualties, no confirmed survivors in this sector. And the civilian forces? Operating with extreme prejudice and remarkable efficiency, Holt replied, watching as more Chinese ships landed to disgorge fresh troops. They've lost entire worlds to vampire raids, Commander, millions dead. They understand what's at stake here. Copy that, Major. Continue your operations. We'll keep the bureaucrats off your back. Above, Admiral Draculesti faced a choice that would define the rest of his career. His tactical display showed night vessels positioned to defend every major civilian concentration, their impossible technology making any attack suicidal. His own ground forces were in various stages of refusing orders, and below, the systematic extermination of the vampire species continued without pause. Admiral, his tactical officer said quietly, we're receiving stand-down orders from 7th Fleet Command. They're ordering us to withdraw and allow Knight Command to handle the situation. Draculesti's face went through several interesting color changes as he realized that his superiors, monitoring the situation from light years away, had decided that starting a shooting war with the Texas Knights over the fate of blood-drinking monsters was not a battle worth fighting. Sir, the tactical officer prompted. For a long moment, the admiral stared at the displays showing his mutinous ground forces, the defiant civilian hunters and the night vessels that had effortlessly neutralized his authority. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "All units," he said, his voice hollow, "stand down and withdraw to minimum safe distance. Maintain observation protocols only." Across Volkmar Prime's 7th Fleet troops began pulling back from their confrontation with the civilian hunters. Many of them looked relieved. They had signed up to fight humanity's enemies, not to protect them. Commander Reynolds' voice filled the comm channels one final time. "All civilian vessels, this is Night Command. You are cleared to complete your operations. Give 'em hell." The response was immediate and multilingual, thousands of voices in dozens of languages, all conveying the same message. The hunt continues. Down on the surface, Holt stood among the ruins of the last major temple complex, his crimson quantum spurs casting their blood-red glow over the devastation. Around him, Colonel Wang's forces moved through the wreckage with methodical precision, ensuring no vampire had survived their assault. His comm system crackled with reports from across the planet. "Reagan here, all blood storage facilities destroyed. You reporting, ritual chambers neutralized. Yamamoto confirms, breeding laboratories eliminated. Petrov here, no vampire survivors detected in Sector 12. One by one, the reports came in, systematic, thorough, complete. The vampires of Volkmar Prime, a species that had terrorized human space for decades, that had fed on millions of innocent civilians across dozens of worlds, that had tortured 35,624 prisoners under Holt's helpless observation and countless millions more beyond his sight, were being driven to extinction. "Major Holt," came Reynolds' voice, "we're reading massive quantum disturbances from your location. What's your status?" Holt looked down at his quantum spurs, their crimson glow pulsing with the rhythm of his heartbeat. The rage that had sustained him through months of captivity and weeks of hunting remained, but it had transformed into something else. Purpose, determination, an unshakable conviction that this work was far from finished. "Mission progressing, Commander," he reported, his voice carrying the weight of uncounted dead. "The brief on Volkmar Prime are nearly extinct, but this was just their homeworld." Around him, the combined forces of humanity, knights and civilians, military and militia, veterans and volunteers, stood among the ashes of their enemies. They had come from across human space, united by shared loss and common purpose, to deliver justice that no court could provide and no authority could prevent. Above, the stars shone down on the burning ruins of Volkmar Prime, the vampire homeworld that would never again serve as the beating heart of their blood-soaked civilization. In the distance, civilian ships were already departing, their crews carrying with them the satisfaction of having finally struck back at the monsters that had haunted their nightmares. But others remained. Colonel Wang's Chinese forces were already coordinating with other militia groups, sharing intelligence about other brief strongholds scattered across the galaxy. Captain Reagan was broadcasting frequencies where vengeful civilians could gather for the next hunt. And throughout human space, the word was spreading. The vampires could be beaten, could be exterminated, if people were willing to do what needed to be done. "Commander Reynolds," Holt transmitted on the open channel, his crimson quantum spurs flaring against the burning sky, requesting permission to continue operations against remaining brief concentrations throughout human space. A pause, then Reynolds' voice returned, carrying a note that suggested he understood exactly what Holt was asking. "Major, Night Command will need to convene regarding your operational status. In the meantime, I'm authorizing you to act independently as circumstances require." It was as close to official approval as Holt would get for what came next. The hunt wouldn't end here on Volkmar Prime. It couldn't end here, not while brief vampires still lurked in the dark corners of the galaxy. waiting to feed on human suffering. Holt holstered his sidearm and looked out across the devastation, his quantum spurs leaving trails of crimson fire as he moved. The names of 35,624 prisoners still echoed in his enhanced memory, but now they were joined by the uncounted millions who had died across human space. Entire colonies drained, worlds left lifeless, families destroyed in blood-soaked rituals older than human civilization. Behind him, the last temple of Volkmar Prime collapsed in flames. Before him, the stars beckoned with the promise of more vampires to hunt, more debts to settle, more justice to deliver. The battle for Volkmar Prime was won, but the war against the brief, the true war, fought not by bureaucrats and admirals, but by those who had lost everything to the vampire's endless hunger, was just beginning. Holt's quantum spurs pulsed crimson as he stood atop the ruined altar, surveying the devastation. Around him, Colonel Wang's forces were securing the perimeter, while civilian hunters continued their methodical sweep of the temple ruins. The satisfying reports of confirmed vampire kills kept streaming in, but Holt's attention was drawn upward. The sky above Volkmar Prime was filling with new arrivals. Shuttles and gunships descended through the smoke-filled atmosphere, their hulls bearing markings that made Holt's enhanced memory catalog each one with perfect clarity. The Lone Star of Texas blazed on dozens of vessels, but a significant portion bore the Red Cross and medical insignia of night field hospitals. 50, 60, perhaps 70% of the incoming ships were medical vessels, mobile trauma units, surgical transports, recovery ships equipped with the most advanced life-saving technology human space could provide. The remaining ships bore the proud symbols of worlds settled by Americans who had carried their love of liberty and self-governance across the stars: New Arizona, New Montana, New Georgia. Patriotic colonies that understood bone deep what it meant to stand against tyranny and evil, regardless of what distant bureaucrats commanded. The insignia of the New Brazos Planetary Guard flew alongside them, the cross rifles of New Virginia's colonial militia, the lone pine tree of New Maine's defense force, ships from colonies that owed their existence to Texas knights who had arrived in their darkest hours, turning certain death into survival. "Major," Colonel Wang approached, her weapons crew still sweeping the ruins behind her. "More ships arrive, many medical ships. Good. We have wounded." "I see them," Holt replied, watching the formation descend with military precision. These weren't the chaotic arrivals of civilian hunters. This was coordinated, professional, purposeful. One of the medical transports settled onto a cleared area about 200 meters from his position. The rear ramp dropped immediately, and a team of medics and armed security personnel rushed out, their movements practiced and efficient. They moved toward a group of wounded Chinese fighters that Wang's forces had gathered for triage. Holt's enhanced vision tracked the medical team automatically, cataloging their movements, their equipment, their coordination. One figure caught his attention, a nurse in Night Medical Corps uniform, her movements graceful despite the urgency of the situation. She was directing the placement of medical equipment, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. Without thinking, Holt activated his helmet's zoom function, bringing her face into sharp focus. Dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, strong features marked by concentration as she assessed a wounded fighter, capable hands already moving to stabilize an injury. His optical systems automatically scanned for identifying markers, rank insignia, name tag, and his zoom focused on her hands. No ring. A flicker of something unexpected stirred in his chest. Something that wasn't rage or determination or the burning need for vengeance that had consumed him for months. Something almost forgotten, a reminder that he was still human beneath the crimson glow and the weight of 35,624 names. Then a night gunshot broke from the formation, its quantum drives flaring blue as it accelerated directly toward Holt's position, shattering his momentary distraction. The vessel was larger than the standard scouts, built for both transport and combat, its hull scarred from countless engagements. It streaked across the burning sky with the confidence of a predator that had never known defeat. At the last possible moment, the gunship's pilot pulled up hard, the quantum spurs on its landing gear blazing as it executed a perfect combat descent. The ship settled onto the ruined plaza in front of the altar, its landing thrusters kicking up clouds of ash and dust that swirled around Holt's crimson glowing boots. The rear ramp dropped with hydraulic precision and a figure appeared in the opening. "Major Holt." The voice carried across the devastation with unmistakable authority. "Get your ass aboard, now." Holt recognized that voice even before his enhanced vision cataloged the details. Knight Commander Daniel Reynolds stood at the top of the ramp, his quantum spurs leaving blue trails on the metal deck plates. But time and war had left their marks since Holt had last seen his old instructor. Reynolds had aged, the lines on his face ran deeper, and his hair had gone completely silver. His left arm was entirely robotic from the shoulder down, the advanced prosthetic humming with quantum-enhanced servos that moved with inhuman precision. Scars crisscrossed his visible skin, each one a story of battles fought and won across human space. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had evaluated thousands of knight candidates over decades of service, were unchanged. They fixed on Holt with an intensity that made even the Crimson Hunter pause. Holt turned to Colonel Wang. "Continue the sweep, make sure no vampire survives." She nodded, already barking orders in Mandarin to her troops. Holt walked toward the gunship, his crimson quantum spurs leaving glowing footprints across the scorched ground. As he climbed the ramp, Reynolds stepped back to give him room. "Commander," Holt said formally, coming to attention. Reynolds looked him up and down, taking in the battle-scarred armor, the crimson glow of the quantum spurs, the hard set of Holt's jaw. His robotic arm whirred softly as he gestured toward the ship's interior. "Inside, Major. We need to talk and we need to move fast." The gunship's interior was pure military efficiency. Crash seats along the bulkheads, weapons racks secured against the walls, tactical displays showing the ongoing battle across Volkmar Prime. Several other knights occupied the space, their quantum spurs casting blue light that contrasted sharply with Holt's crimson glow. Reynolds moved to the tactical station as the ramp sealed behind them. "Pilot, take us up, bearing direct to the 7th Fleet flagship." The gunship lifted smoothly, its quantum drives humming as they accelerated away from the surface. Through the viewports, Holt could see the full extent of the reinforcements that had arrived, hundreds of ships in tight formation. The majority bearing medical insignia, alongside the marks of Texas Allied colonies. "Commander," Holt began, but Reynolds held up his robotic hand. "First, you need to understand what just happened up there." Reynolds activated the tactical display, showing a recording of Admiral Dracolesti's bridge. Everything the Admiral broadcast, every order, every threat, every word, was transmitted live across the entire quantum communication network. Holt's eyes narrowed. How? Someone on his bridge was running an open feed to every colony, every outpost, every ship in human space. Reynolds' expression was grim. Billions of people watched him order his fleet to fire on civilians who were fighting vampires. They heard him threaten to kill humans for daring to eliminate the monsters that had slaughtered millions. The display shifted, showing data streams from across human space, petitions, formal protests, demands for justice, all flooding toward the central command structure faster than any bureaucracy could hope to contain. 16 planetary governors have formally demanded his court-martial, Reynolds continued, his robotic fingers manipulating the display with precise movements. 23 colonial militia commanders have filed charges of attempted murder of civilians under military protection. The new Brazos Planetary Guard, you remember them, the colony we saved from the Kreth invasion 15 years ago. They've threatened to secede from the unified command structure if he isn't prosecuted. Holt processed this information, his enhanced memory cataloging each detail. And Knight Command's position? Reynolds turned to face him directly, his scarred face hard. Knight Command sent me and every available knight who shares our philosophical alignment regarding the brief situation. We're here to make sure justice is done, both for the vampires and for officers who think they can threaten civilians fighting for their survival. The gunship broke through Valkmar Prime's atmosphere, and the full scope of the orbital situation became visible. The 7th Fleet had pulled back to a defensive perimeter, but they were surrounded by the newly arrived Texas Allied forces. Hundreds of ships, all positioned to protect the civilian hunters below, and the majority were medical vessels, their holds filled with the means to save the wounded warriors who had answered Holt's call. The Admiral is being formally relieved of command pending court-martial, Reynolds said, watching the tactical display. Charges include attempted murder of civilians, obstruction of legitimate military operations against hostile forces, conduct unbecoming an officer, and about 40 other violations that various legal teams are still compiling. He looked back at Holt, his expression unreadable. Everything he broadcast was seen and heard by everyone, Major. The families of the millions the brief killed, the survivors of feeding raids, the colonies that lost entire populations. They all watched him try to protect the vampires from justice. The gunship angled toward the 7th Fleet flagship, but it wasn't alone. A full squadron of night vessels moved in formation around them, their quantum spurs blazing blue against the black of space. "We're about to formally arrest an admiral," Reynolds said, his robotic hand resting on his sword hilt. "One who commanded a fleet but forgot who he was supposed to be protecting. You're coming with me, Major. The people who lost everything to the brief deserve to see the Crimson Hunter present when their would-be executioner faces justice." Holt looked out at the assembled fleet, Texas Knights, planetary guardsmen, colonial militia, medical ships racing to save the wounded, all united in their understanding that some evils demanded extinction, and some officers needed to be reminded that authority came with a responsibility to use it righteously. "Commander," Holt said quietly, "what happens after the Admiral is dealt with?" Reynolds' scarred face showed the hint of a grim smile. "After? After we discuss what comes next. The Breath aren't extinct yet, Major. Volkamar Prime was just their homeworld. There are still vampire nests scattered across the galaxy, still feeding on human suffering." His robotic hand gripped Holt's shoulder with surprising gentleness despite its artificial nature. "And there's still a lot of people out there who want to help you finish what you started. Properly. With the full backing of everyone who understands that sometimes the old rules don't apply when you're fighting monsters." The flagship grew larger in the viewport as they approached. Holt could see the Admiral's ship surrounded by night vessels, their blue quantum trails forming a cage of light around the vessel that had nearly fired on civilians. "Time to show that Admiral what happens when you forget who the real enemy is," Reynolds said, his quantum spurs flaring as the gunship prepared to dock. "And then, Major Holt, we plan the next hunt." Holt's crimson quantum spurs pulsed in response, their blood-red glow reflecting off the gunship's interior. Behind them, Volkamar Prime burned, medical ships racing to save the wounded who had fought for justice. Ahead, an admiral faced judgment for his crimes. And beyond that, across the infinite black of space, vampires still lurked in the darkness. But darkness never had, nor would it ever prevail. Many thanks to my channel members and Pathfinders. You all make these videos possible. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Video shares, memberships, and super thanks help the channel grow as well, so feel free to partner with this channel in that way as we grow. With that all said, thank you again for listening to the story, and thank you for your time. On the left side of your screen are some videos I think you might be interested in. I hope to see you in the next one.